Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Payments Fraud Virtual Summit. My name is Mark Brousseau, President of Brousseau and Associates. I'm pleased to be your moderator for today's event. Today's event is brought to you by VendorInfo. I have just a few housekeeping notes to go over before we officially get started. To ensure call quality, everyone's voice lines have been muted today. We encourage you to ask questions throughout today's event. To do so, simply use the Q&A tool on your screen to submit your questions to me. We'll answer your questions at the conclusion of today's event. And finally, an on-demand recording of today's event will be made available to all of you within the next few business days. We encourage you to share it with your peers and your coworkers. A recent study by the Institute of Finance and Management found that concerns about fraud and compliance risks are the number one issue that accounts payable leaders face today. In fact, a recent study by AFP found that nearly 8 out of every 10 organizations have experienced attempted or actual fraud within the past year alone. Today, fraud is more sophisticated, it's more brazen, and unfortunately, it's more successful than ever before. During today's virtual event, we're going to provide you with advice and recommendations from experts who are in the field every day, technology providers, as well as practitioners. We're going to give you the information you need to stop fraudsters in their tracks. We'll start with a quick introduction, state of the industry, if you will, from Phil Binkow, the CEO of VendorInfo. Then Assaf Dargan is going to be along from nsKnox to show you how it is that you can mitigate the risk of falling victim to fraud schemes involving international bank accounts. Shelly Ann Campbell from Esker will talk about how it is that artificial intelligence can help protect source to pay from fraud and risk. And then MasterCard's Bob Cohen will be here to show you how you can redesign your payments processes for this fraud first world in which we live. Next, we've got a can't miss panel with two AP practitioners who will share their experiences with fraud and the strategies they're using to mitigate the risk. And finally, at the conclusion of today's event, we're going to arm you with a practical roadmap for how it is you should move forward to mitigate your risks. And we're going to provide you with a live demonstration of one solution for automating the verification of bank account change requests. But before we do any of that, we wanted to give Phil Binkow, the CEO of VendorInfo, a few moments to welcome you to today's event. Hey, Phil, thanks for joining us.
Hi, Mark. Thank you very much. And good morning, everyone. It is a privilege to welcome you to the Payments Fraud Summit, a topic that's no longer a niche risk issue. Today, it's become a C-level and a board-level priority. 10 years ago, payments fraud could be viewed as an operational nuisance, something handled by compliance teams, internal audit, or treasury after the fact. Today, it's different. Payments fraud has evolved into a strategic threat. It impacts earnings, brand trust, regulatory exposure, and sometimes executives' careers. Today we're operating in a moment of structural change. Payments are faster. Supply chains are more global. Vendors are more distributed. Automation is everywhere, and attackers are more sophisticated than ever before. Electronic payments means funds move instantly, but so do mistakes. AI accelerates productivity, and fraudsters are using it too. The core shift we're all dealing with is this: fraud is no longer a perimeter problem, it's an identity and control problem. The question is no longer, can someone break into our systems? The question is, can someone convincingly impersonate a legitimate counterparty inside of our processes? Whether it's business email compromise, vendor impersonation, deep fake enabled authorization fraud, or synthetic identities, the common thread is exploitation of trust within legitimate workflows. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Most fraud doesn't happen because companies lack systems. It happens because companies rely on systems which are often designed for process efficiency, not adversarial resilience. Workflow is not the same as verification. Automation by itself is not the same as control. And integration is not the same as protection. That tension between speed, efficiency, and control is at the center of modern payments risk. Organizations are under immense pressure to accelerate vendor onboarding, reduce friction in accounts payable, enable electronic payments, scale globally, and cut operational costs. But at the same time, we're all expected to prevent fraud, maintain strong internal controls, pass audits, satisfy regulators, and protect shareholder value. The reality is that speed and safety are often designed by different teams with different objectives. Procurement wants faster onboarding and fewer vendors. Finance wants clean controls. IT wants security enabled vendors. And senior execs and the board want zero headlines. Payments fraud thrives in the gaps between those incentives. And that's why the most resilient organizations are not treating fraud as an incident response function. They're treating it as an architectural decision. They're asking, where in our processes does financial risk truly enter the system? Who owns verification before money moves? How do we independently validate identities, account, and intent? And what assumptions are we making that an attacker could exploit? Resilient organizations are shifting from reactive detection to proactive design. And that's what this summit is all about. Over the next few sessions, we'll explore the latest fraud typologies and emerging attack vendors, how AI is shaping both fraud and defense, control frameworks that withstand the various payments environments, and case studies from organizations that have strengthened their payments infrastructure. But importantly, this is a forum for discussion. Fraud is often underreported, losses are minimized, incidents are quietly absorbed, yet the lessons are incredibly valuable when shared. This audience represents a cross section of finance leaders, risk professionals, technologists, auditors, and policymakers. So the complexity of payments fraud means no single function can solve it all alone. The organizations that will lead over the next decade will not be those with the flashiest technology. They'll be the ones that align governance, process, and architecture around one principle. Money should only move when identity, authorization, and intent have been independently validated. That's a high bar. But in a world of rapid payments and intelligent attackers, it's the right one. My hope is that by the end of the day, you walk away with a clearer view of your exposure, a sharper understanding of where your true control points are, and practical ideas you can implement. Payments fraud is not going away, but neither is our ability to design smarter systems, strengthen verification, and reduce the asymmetry between attackers and defenders. Thank you so much for being here and for investing the time and for being a part of the solution. So, Mark, let's get started.
Absolutely. And let's start with a level set, Phil. As you said, this is a top of mind issue for the folks who've attended today. We want to hear from you. We want you all to open up the Q&A tool on your screen right now and tell us, what is it that's keeping you up at night when it comes to fraud risk today? What is your biggest concern about the way you're doing things, about the schemes you're encountering, or about the gaps in your current processes? Type it into your Q&A tool, pound that submit button, and send them to us now. During today's event, We hope to provide you with some actionable advice for how it is that you can go about mitigating those risks. One of the biggest risks that organizations face when it comes to fraud is around how it is that they can verify the authenticity or the ownership of international bank accounts. And here now to tell us how it is that organizations can mitigate their risks when it comes to paying international suppliers, we're pleased to be joined by Assaf Dargan, the of nsKnox. Hey, Assaf, how are you today?
Hey Mark, hey Phil, I'm doing just fine. I hope you guys can see me.
We can we we
Yes, indeed.
we can indeed, Assaf. Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure. So, and really thank you for all of you guys, everyone that is attending. Welcome everyone. Good morning. Really happy to be here. So, as Mark pointed out, my name is Assaf Dargan. I'm the VP Marketing and Sales Operations at nsKnox Technologies, and we're a proud partner of VendorInfo. We work together. And if there's one thing I would like you to take from this session is the understanding that fraudsters don't care about borders, right? And this is why you should not care about, you should not have your validation tools only on a domestic level. So while many organizations rely strictly on domestic data, that approach leaves a dangerous blind spot when dealing with international payments. And today we're going to dive into adaptive payment security and explore how we can bridge that gap. I'll show you how to supercharge your existing workflows with global intelligence, giving you the power to verify any account anywhere in the world, completely eliminating manual callbacks, all right from within your VI portal. So let's, with your permission, get started. Okay, so just a bit about us. So nsKnox Technologies is kind of like in the crossroads between fintech and cybersecurity. The smiling gentleman over there is Alan Cohen, is
Excuse
the
me, Assaf.
founder.
Assaf,
Yeah.
excuse me. I think we're seeing your presenter view of your slides rather than the
Oh, I'm
slideshow.
sorry.
No,
I'm
you're fine.
sorry. Is that good now?
Perfect. Thank you.
Is it any better or
Yeah,
we're
perfect.
still?
Yep, you're
Yeah.
good.
Okay. Good. Good. All right. Thank you. So, so this fine gentleman is Alan Cohen. He's the founder and executive chairman of nsKnox, and previously he was the founder and executive chairman of CyberArk, which I'm sure you've heard of, a very large company. So the roots are deep in cybersecurity, and you can see from the short list of customers that we're serving is that they really come from multiple industries. So fraud is a huge problem, payment fraud, and it's really industry agnostic, and you'll see why. And I think, again, most of the folks here understand the problem and understand why payment fraud is rising. We all know that 83% and even more of large companies are being hit by payment fraud. That's according to AFP, with 2 to even sometimes 5% of their revenue lost to fraud. And a single incident can even top 100 million or more. And the way the bad guys are doing this is first and foremost by using social engineering. So that's business email compromise. But they also do a lot of email account takeover. And in recent years, what we're seeing because of the surge in AI is that they deploy deepfake AI techniques where they can manipulate voice, they can do voice cloning, they can do video cloning. I'll give you some examples later on. And this is becoming really dangerous and almost impossible to detect without technology. But they don't stop just there because we all hear about cyber attacks that are involved with ransomware. And we think it ends there, but it doesn't, because once they're in the system, they will also go immediately to the master vendor file, and they will either steal it or inject wrong digits in the numbers of in the accounts in order to steal those funds later. And lastly, nobody wants to talk about it, but there's a huge problem of bad insiders. PwC mentioned that 50% of economic crime is committed by internal actors. That's not always intentional, but it's a problem, and we need to make sure that no one tampers with the data, both from the outside but also from the inside. So in essence, the problem is really across the throughout the whole procure-to-pay journey. Okay, so there's multiple attack vectors in which the fraudsters can get in, and this is why we really believe that all of the journey needs to be protected in order to make sure that nothing changes along the way. And since this is really the era of synthetic reality, we all read and talk and use AI. We know nowadays that it's really very simple, ridiculously simple to create deepfake video. And I won't show you this video, but this guy is mimicking Morgan Freeman perfectly. You couldn't tell the difference if you only heard the voice. So let's dive in and talk a bit about some payment fraud case studies. And those are real examples that happened either recently or just 2 years ago. And those are really mind-blowing. I'm sure you've all heard of Arup. So in 2024, a finance employee at their Hong Kong branch, this is a British engineering firm, he was deceived into transferring almost $26 million to cyber criminals. And this sophisticated scam was executed using real-time AI deepfakes to impersonate the company's CFO and other trusted colleagues during a live video conference call. So imagine to yourselves, they sat in a meeting with the CFO and other colleagues from the finance department and other people. And the people on the other line, they just thought they were real people, but they were all avatars. And their global chief information officer, Rob Craig, said later that audio and visual cues are very important to us as humans, and these technologies are playing on that and playing on that very well. A case that shows the difficulties with cyber attacks that I mentioned before is the one with Stoli, the vodka manufacturers. So actually their US division plunged into bankruptcy with roughly $78 million in debt after a devastating ransomware attack that disabled its core ERP systems and crippled global operations. And it really made it impossible for the treasurer and the finance teams to verify vendor accounts, bank details, and even their own cash positions. And lastly, I'm sure you've all heard about the Bridgestone case, where former assistant treasurer of Bridgestone Americas had been arrested and charged. This is from the Department of Justice in the US. He basically submitted $50 million in fake reimbursement invoices and created a fake vendor and practically stole this money. And look at this interesting stat that 83% of people surveyed, of professionals surveyed by Cybersecurity Insider mentioned that they experienced, their organization experienced at least one insider fraud attempt in the past 12 months. And this was done, I think, in 2024. So again, things to think about. So what I'm trying to say is that we need to understand the adversary. Okay, there's now everything has become more industrialized, and payment fraud is no different. And the fraudsters nowadays, it's not the kid in the basement with the hoodie anymore. It's organized crime. They're super, they work with a business model. They're very ROI driven. They have an automated reconnaissance. They use AI, obviously, to gather data and to search for targets. And they scale with precision. So they will do spray and pray, but also they will be very hyper targeted to find supply chains that they can target. And they will be using, and they are using Gen AI. They've actually weaponized the Gen AI. They will use social engineering, what we call 2.0 social engineering. That's the flawless impersonation. And think about it, it's not even that sophisticated. Nowadays, we work with Gemini, for instance, in the Google email exchange, and it really learns how you send emails to your peers, to your colleagues, to someone in other departments, or to your clients. And if someone, if a fraudster hacks in and he learns through AI how your CEO or your CFO usually refers to you and sends you emails or Slack messages, they can do the same. And not to mention that there are troves of stolen credentials in the dark web that they're using. So they are attacking the entire procure-to-pay chain, and we need to make sure that everything is protected. First and foremost, to have the vendor onboarding and updates done right, but then also make sure to safeguard the data at rest and also during payment runs. So with that, I want to switch gears and tell us a bit about our product and how we're working together with VendorInfo to make sure that you onboard legitimate vendors with legitimate bank accounts. So nsKnox for AP is our outgoing payment security product. We also have one for incoming, but I won't talk about it today. And the design goals really for us, when we thought about how do we want to do this, is first and foremost, make sure that we verify accounts globally with 100% coverage. Because a fraudulent account is always in the unknown. It's they know that you're searching a certain database. They know that companies check with certain banks, and they will always try to find this exotic bank in a very far away country where you won't be able to verify their account, right? So we wanted to make sure that we can verify any account anywhere in the world. The second design goal was to verify based on banking data, not to trust third-party services, make sure that all the repositories that you check into are with verified banking data from the banking system. And this is the KYC data. We all know that banks can do mistakes, of course, but the KYC process is the most rigorous one. So this is the best way, the best source, actually. And lastly, a continuous validation, as I mentioned, because it will be a real bummer to have an account verified and validated and put it in the system, in the master vendor file, only later to find out that someone from the outside, or God forbid from the inside, has manipulated with it, and now you end up paying to the wrong entity. So I won't go too deep into that, but this is the process, this is the product. So we do bank account validation, both domestic and international. Then we have the second product to do continuous validation, and we check the payment transaction verification before sending a reconciliation to the bank or ACH. And this is all powered by a patent that we have for corporate cybersecurity technology. And now we're coming to the part where this is how we work also with VendorInfo. So I mentioned any account validation, global account validation, any account anywhere. And we separate this between an in-network and out-of-network capability. So we have our own database, which is growing by the month. And for every query over there, it's going to be really quick. Same goes to an extensive network of global validation sources, which are sources that we validated, that we know they are coming from the bank, and we use them. And also with open banking account validation. All of these work pretty fast, could be milliseconds, could be a few hours, depending. But you will be getting an answer very quickly. What happens when the bank account that you're trying to validate, your vendor's bank account, does not appear in any of those three resources? So in other services that are not offered by us and by VI, that's the end of the road. All you can do is just pick up the phone with the hopes that you get the right person on the other line and be able to confirm the account. But we have developed both the technology and the methodology to do what we call out-of-network validation. It's country and bank specific. We usually have sort of like a mini payment, a ping pong with the vendor, depending on the country and the bank. And we get this KYC information, and we can validate the account even if we don't have any connection or any agreement with that certain bank. We can get roughly around 60% of all of the accounts that you'll be looking for with the in-network validation part, the quick one. And we complete that with the out-of-network validation until we reach 100%. We call it quick check. That's the smart rapid in-network search, and nsKnox verifies the secure proprietary method to validate any account if it's not in any global or domestic repository. On top of that, we have community insights. That's an added layer of trust. Anyone who works with us and is willing to contribute an anonymized master vendor file data, they can unlock access to the collective knowledge of the secure community database. And then they can see, for instance, if 5 or 10 or 15 or more customers of ours have already paid that specific account and there weren't any issues, no red flags. That's an added layer of trust that they can use in order to make their decision. And now I want to show you how the integration with VendorInfo looks like to the end user, obviously to the vendor that you want to make sure that their bank account is validated. So I'll walk you through that. It's really simple. The first one, as you see, and those are VendorInfo screens. So the first one, the one to my left, is, and by the way, this was branded with the customer's logo and colors. So if it's a new vendor, they register, they press the yellow side, the yellow tab. If they're an existing vendor, they do an edit. So they just edit their vendor data there. Then they complete and submit the vendor information form. So they populate the form with everything that, with all of the data that VendorInfo needs. And then if this could be validated right away without calling nsKnox's services, it ends there and that's it, you're good to go. If nsKnox's services are needed, the iframe appears and then they get moved to nsKnox screens. The first one is kind of like, and by the way, all of the screens happen in the same session, so they don't have to like log into another session. Those are our screens. So the first one is welcome to nsKnox account validation service. They can see an informational video and FAQs. It's really simple. It's an easy two-step process. They move on. They to the next screen where all the form information is pulled in, so they don't need to retype it again, everything that they typed before. And then if no action is needed, meaning that it can be found in the quick check, through the quick check scheme, they will receive it right away, and you also will be notified, of course, that this account is validated. If it cannot be found in any of the repositories that I showed you before, there will be this little screen will pop up. A micro transfer is needed. Instructions are given immediately to the vendor and also emailed. And also you as a customer will know that they've started this process, which usually takes a day or two. By the end of it, both the vendor and the customer will get a notification that everything is set up and validated and good to go. To sum it up, I think the most important thing, as I said before, you cannot trust only domestic resources, only domestic databases. You need to make sure, and again, you can do a database search, but everyone offers a database search. Everyone offers a network of validation partners. So there's some networks, most of them are domestic and not international. But when it comes to out-of-network validations, the real ability to search for any account globally, we're the only ones that do that with authoritative data from the banking system. And the community insights are just a good add-on for added security. So it's truly global. It's adaptive because the user can see and the user can use the screens as I showed. It's not. It's pretty user-friendly and adaptive. It's reliable and trustworthy because it uses only the authoritative data from the banking system. It provides a standardization and enforcement of internal controls with the organization. So that's it for me. I'm happy to take any questions that you might have, or of course, you can send questions later on.
Indeed, yeah. So if you have questions for Assaf, go ahead, use the Q&A tool on your screen to submit your question to me now. We already have several in the queue, but we have time for others. Our first question, Assaf, is from Lilia. Lilia wants to know, what fraud trends you're seeing increase the most over the past 12 to 18 months? Are there certain types of schemes that you're seeing more of, Assaf?
Sorry, I missed the first part of the question because the connection was bad. Sorry, can you repeat the question, Mark?
Absolutely. Lilia wants to know, what fraud trends are you seeing increase the most over the past 12 to 18 months? So, presumably, what types of schemes are you seeing grow the most?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you, Lillian. So I think what we've seen again and again is that deepfake AI is kind of like, deepfake AI that is using a BEC attack, business email compromise, to get in the organization. And then once they're in and once they learn the email exchange and everything, they usually do what's easier for them, which is to make a phone call that mimics the person that you used to talk to on the other line. And this is, we're seeing this more and more because it's becoming super easy to do.
Lena's wondering a question that I bet you get asked a lot, and that is, can only large companies afford a solution like this? And let's face it, Assaf, all companies of all sizes are experiencing fraud. How does it work? Can smaller companies actually deploy a solution like the one you've described here?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, when we started out, I think we needed to do a lot of market education, and a lot of folks we talked with, they knew that fraud is out there, but they didn't experience too much fraud, or they took it like, as the cost of doing business. And so typically we went to large organizations, but nowadays, I think together with VendorInfo, we can serve smaller companies, and I think everyone suffers from fraud. The thing is, we automated it so well that it's really easier for us to serve smaller companies, and I think it's even more needed for them than the bigger ones, right? Because imagine losing $100,000 or even more. It can be sometimes problematic. So yeah, absolutely, we can
Yeah.
work with smaller companies.
Mark, if I could just interrupt also, Assaf, and thank you so much. This is really helpful.
Sure.
Going back to the previous question about emerging threats, something that we are seeing increasingly frequently is the compromising of a supplier's telephone system. And folks are making telephone calls. We've heard this 3 times in the last 6 weeks, where somebody in the company, in the paying company, was doing a telephone verification with the vendor. They truly believed that they were talking with the vendor, and it turned out that they actually weren't talking with the supplier. They were talking with the fraudster who had compromised the supplier's telephone system. It's unbelievable, really. And that with voice cloning, we're on the watch for these things.
Yeah, that's a very important remark, Phil. And I think that we're seeing from customers and from prospects, what we're hearing is that they even when they do this with voice cloning, they don't hesitate even to move to a video call. They ask you, hey, you want us to go live on a video call? That's perfectly fine, and that's very reassuring, right? But it's actually not.
Wow.
We have a question from Priscina. Priscina wants to know, so how can we trust the nsKnox network? We've experienced fraud happening within our company. How about that, Assaf?
So first of all, the thing is that we don't trust any external ways of validating the account. So in the sense that we don't trust a callback, we don't trust a video conference, and we don't even I hate to say it, but we don't trust the person in the system because, again, it can be a bad apple, right? So we only get the data from the banking system. And if it matches, it matches. If it doesn't, then it doesn't. So you only get the right information from the best source available. And this is why you don't need to do any manual callbacks, or you don't need to do, like, of course, we would recommend you to have 2 sets of eyes and, for every validation internally, for every input of the data. But if you send us your master vendor file, we can, and again, I didn't talk about it too much, but we're scanning the master data file to make sure that no one changes it on a periodic. It can be even every day, every end of business day. So all of these steps in the way help you catch any fraud, whether it's from the outside or from the inside.
Yeah, Assaf, Robin is wondering whether your solution would help with fake invoices.
Yeah, fake invoices is also a problem, but again, we don't scan fake invoices. We don't scan invoices, so we cannot see if they're fake or not. But again, they usually come from a bad source, and if you caught that source at the beginning and made sure that all of the information is kept intact within the organization, the chances of fake invoices, reaching your door are minimal.
Yeah. Question from Bruno. Bruno wants to know, how different is this product from a micro deposit validation?
So that's a good question. So micro deposit is really a part of the solution for the nsKnox Verify for the global validation. That, again, for those accounts, it can be found in all of the data repositories. But this is not just a single payment. Sometimes we ask the vendor to send us money. Sometimes we will send the vendor money. But through this interaction with the vendor, we will know whether or not this vendor or this person is who he claims to be, because we can extract the KYC data. How we do it exactly, that's our secret sauce, but it's been working for us for the past almost 9 years with not a problem anywhere in the world. And it's much more sophisticated than your regular penny drop or what consumer services are doing to make sure that your credit card is not stolen. It's much more sophisticated than that. I hope it answers the question.
Yeah, Priscina sent a follow-up question, just a clarification on those validations you described a moment ago, Assaf. Priscina wants to know, are those automated as well?
Sorry, again, which ones?
Priscina, for internal fraud, wanted to know if those are automated validations.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, thank you for that clarification. Yes, absolutely. Those are automated, and no one can change them but the person that is registered in our system. So yeah, those checks, those internal checks, can be done in any. Again, it can be in every hour or every end of business day or every week. The thing is that even if you catch, and sometimes, by the way, we see that there's a change, and we raise a red flag, and the organization checks it, and sometimes it's someone changed the numbers, but they were supposed to do that, or there's a problem with the system, with the ERP system. But don't forget that we do another check before the payment is going on to the bank or ACH. So that's like another checkpoint. We also have a final checkpoint at the gate before the money leaves the organization.
All right, so Esther wants to know, so what happens if we have an account to validate that isn't in your database? You referred to this, but maybe explain the process to Esther.
Yeah, absolutely. So if it's in our database, that's a no-brainer, right? Because like in any database, you just query the database, you get an answer, and that's it. But sometimes, and if it's not in our database, there's the trusted databases that we work with and we check regularly. But if it's not there, or if the answer that you've received, because I didn't want to show you our screens, I can do that at, privately at the later session. But sometimes you get lots of matching points, but you want to now transfer $1 million, and you want to make 100% sure that you need more information. or it couldn't be found in the database. Those are two scenarios. Then you initiate the nsKnox verify process. With vendor info, that's automatic. And once we initiate the nsKnox verify process, then we communicate the vendor. We communicate with the vendor, and we validate the account through this mini payment that I explained before. And only when we get the data from their bank, we can validate the account. And I have to tell you that with fraudsters, usually what happens when we ask them, when they know us, and when we ask them to let's start this mini payment scheme, they immediately fly away and not to be returned.
Oh no, not you again, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Assaf, I've had a couple of people write in wondering, can your system get hacked?
Oh, that's a great question. I mean, any system can probably get hacked. The CCS technology is something that Alon has developed with a few of our smart people, not me. And the thing is that all of our information is being stored in different, it's shredded into meaningless pieces of our customers' data, and our data is shredded to meaningless pieces and stored in different places in the world. And you have to break into not one system, but to 4 or 5 different clouds and paste everything together in order to make any use of the data. So of course, any company can get hacked, right? Like, I don't want to brag, but the fact that we work with this technology made Microsoft invest in us, and actually makes us very sure that it will be absolutely very, very difficult to hack into our systems. And even if they do, they won't find anything that they can paste together.
Bruno wants to know, is the account validation happening every time a payment is issued or only when you add new vendors?
That's a great question. It's according to the user to, first of all, any account that is validated and we know that it was validated is entered into our database, it's kept there. And now other companies won't have to go through the rigorous process, right? So this is good. If you validated one account, it stays there forever until there's any changes, obviously, in this account. If you have an account that you need to revalidate, or I mean, it's up to you, the user, to decide if you want to validate any account, or just draw a line in the sand and say, hey, I have already 5,000 accounts, 5,000 vendors that I've been paying them for a while, and I'm sure everything is good, so I don't want you guys to check them. That's fine. Only if they change their account, I want you guys to run the validation or not. You're the one who decides what's your threshold in terms of money being transferred, or if it's only new vendors or vendors that have changed their bank accounts. We know that usually when a vendor asks for a change in their bank account, usually that's where fraudsters inject themselves into the process.
All right, let's slide one more question in here.
Hey, Mark, and let me just add to that, Assaf, that and there's another piece of the application that's called Master Data Guard, and what that will do for you is it can take your bank file and look at that bank payment file before it goes to the bank, and actually highlight any account on that file that has not been verified. So if something got into the vendor file and into the vendor file, into the payment file that was not previously verified, that would show up, with a red flag on it as well. So there's several different ways to attack that continual verification application.
All right, let me slide one more question in here. Lisa writes in, AI is constantly improving and getting better. So how can technology providers like nsKnox keep up? Assaf? It looks like he froze. Phil? Oh, there he is. Go ahead, Assaf.
Yeah. Yeah, sorry, I missed the question because the line was broken.
Lisa
Sorry.
was
Can
Lisa
you
was
repeat
noting
the
that
question?
absolutely, Assaf. Lisa was noting that AI technology is constantly evolving and getting better. She's wondering, so how can vendors like you keep up?
It's hard for us to keep up. Actually,
Ah,
it's it's a lot of work, and we also use AI for good, right? There's AI helps a lot, but again, it goes back to the core. We feel that you cannot trust. We said that years ago before the AI exploded that you cannot trust manual processes. You cannot just trust someone to pick up the phone and be absolutely sure that he's talking to the right person at the other end of the word. So we don't trust manual processes. We don't trust AI in this particular mission, and this is why we're not using. We'll never use AI to validate an account. We'll use AI to help us understand, or help us make some things easier for the user, but not to validate an account. So the account is validated only through the banking system. So there's no one that can really hacks into that, other than hacking into the banking system. But that's a scenario that fortunately we haven't seen so far.
that will be our final word. Jacqueline sent in a round of applause for you, Assaf, and
Thank you,
I
Jacqueline.
and I concur. Excellent presentation. Great start to our event. A couple of you have written in wondering if they could receive a copy of today's presentation. Yes, we're going to send you all an on-demand recording of this webinar, but we'll also be happy to send you the PowerPoint materials as well. Assaf, thank you so much for an excellent
Sure.
presentation and for sharing all your insights with us today. And thank all of
Thank
you
you,
for
Mark.
all of the questions that you have provided. Um, as we've suggested during the start of this event, one of the challenges organizations are facing is that a lot of their processes for addressing fraud have been pretty reactive to this point. We need to get on offense, to be more proactive. And to talk more about that, I'm pleased to be joined now by Shelly Ann Campbell of nsKnox, who's going to show us how artificial intelligence can help us mitigate our risks in a source to pay environment. Hello, Shelly Ann. How are you today?
Good. How are you?
Dynamite. Glad to have you join us. So it can be daunting, Shelly Ann. It can feel like we're always on our heels with these fraud schemes that Assaf was just talking about. Tell us how we can turn the tide and we can stop those fraudsters in their tracks.
Absolutely. Well, so happy to be here to talk to you guys about this. And this topic is just so timely, right? With the economic environment we're in and with all the developments with AI. So today, I'll talk to you about how we leverage AI in the process of source to pay to protect you from fraud and risk. So I'll do a quick introduction. My name is Shelly Ann Campbell. I am the Source to Pay Strategic Solutions Manager at nsKnox. And a part of my role is to kind of talk to customers as well as some of our prospects about how nsKnox leveraging AI technology can help to solve some of the challenges that you're experiencing in your day to day. So just a little bit about nsKnox. nsKnox has been in business for over 40 years. We are a global company. And we are a cloud-based platform that automates some of the critical processes across source to pay, as well as the order to cash cycle, right? And this includes, procurement, AP, AR, order management. And one of the things that we do is that, and we've been doing, is we leverage AI and intelligent automation to help finance leaders gain real-time insight into kind of what's happening. A lot of the conversations prior were talking about, just reactive issues where you kind of find out about fraud after it happens. One of the things that we strive to do is to kind of give you information at your fingertips so that you can make decisions with real-time information. And in many cases, are able to prevent fraud. So just a little bit about what we offer. I won't spend too much time here, but these are all the modules that we cover within Source to Pay, as well as in the order to cash cycle. So before I start, I think I want to hear from you guys. And I don't know if you can put up our poll question, Mark. I want to hear from you guys and understand how does your organization today primarily identify fraud and risk?
Do you
We'll
do
give
it
you maybe
after an issue occurs, post-incident review or audit, through manual checks or approvals, using rules-based alerts, using AI or continuous monitoring, or you're not sure, you have limited visibility? Take a moment to respond to the poll question now displayed on your screen, and we'll discuss the results in just a moment. Shelly Ann, what is it that makes you cringe the most when you look at the way most folks are addressing fraud these days?
I think the key for me that is kind of it's really the supplier verification, right? The way they spend time to do those callbacks. I mean, I think we covered it a bit in our conversation earlier about those callbacks. I mean, I think with artificial intelligence, there are just so many ways right now that you can spoof calls. I mean, I think that's been around for a while, right? Where you can have virtual numbers. Now they can clone voices. You're also able to actually clone somebody on a video call. I mean, we've seen a lot of that even on the news. So I think that concerns me is the fact that we're still relying on some of those old methods.
All right, let's see how our attendees responded to our poll question. We asked you, how does your organization primarily identify fraud and risk today? 67% of our attendees, Shelly Ann, 2/3 say it's through manual checks and approvals. 11% are using AI or continuous monitoring. 11% aren't sure. And the rest of the folks are using rules-based alerts or an after issue or after an issue occurs. But 2/3 of our attendees, Shelly Ann, are using manual checks and approvals. What would be your message to those folks?
I think the rest of the presentation is going to help us to cover that, right? I think it's one of those things that we have to
So
address
pay
immediately.
attention, Mark, is what you're saying. That's
For
okay,
sure.
Shelly Ann, I will.
No worries. I thought I would share some stats with you guys about kind of what this means, what that translates to, right? I think according to the FBI's Internet Crime Complaint Center, business email compromise accounts for about $3 billion of fraud in a single year. And that's not a global statistic. That's just in the United States alone. And the majority of those losses flow through APN procurement. Another stat is the Association of Financial Professionals found that 80% of organizations experience an attempted fraud or an actual fraud attempt each year. And I think, out of 4 of those fraud attacks are specifically designed to exploit APN procurement. So the recurring theme here, right, is the fact that APN procurement is really under attack. And then I think the most staggering one, probably not surprised considering the response we just got from the poll, is that it takes about 8 months to figure out that you've been hit. So think about it, right? You've double paid a vendor, or you've paid the wrong vendor, and eight months into the year is when you figure it out. You've basically lost your ability to get your money back. And that is, through the survey, we're recognizing that is happening a lot more consistent. Another quick poll. Want to learn some more from you guys? Where do you think the greatest fraud risk exists in your source to pay process today? I know before according to these stats, it says APN procurement, but I'm curious to hear from you guys. Does that data align with what you're experiencing every day?
Is there a particular weak spot that you see in organizations or hear from organizations, Shelly Ann, that you're talking to before they automate?
Absolutely. I think the business email compromise is a huge one, right? You'll get an
Huge.
email saying that, change my bank information. I've changed my bank information. Can you please update it to this new one and send me a payment? Similarly, in AP, you'll get a fraudulent invoice. I think in procurement, some of that stems from internally, where you'll see an internal employee will create a requisition for a supplier that doesn't really exist. And then they'll probably have someone to collude with to create a supplier in order to get that money from the organization.
Yeah. Is this a situation? I know a lot of folks tend to focus on the payment, making the payment when it comes to fraud mitigation. In other words, was this payment approved? But the fact is that there's a lot that happens before we ever get to that point that could leave us vulnerable. Talk to me about that, Shelly Ann.
Absolutely. And we're going to cover a lot of that in the presentation as well. Just getting to details around all the little ways that the fraud can be hit. And it's it's one of the things why AI is so important, because there's so many little breakpoints that it's impossible for a human to check all of them consistently on every invoice. Most organizations are dealing with hundreds of thousands of invoices annually. They're also dealing with multiple employees processing those invoices. They're also dealing with turnover. So you're losing knowledge all throughout the process. So the one thing that could be consistent here is leveraging AI throughout the process, because that learns and gets better, or at the very minimum stays the same. So you have that consistency in terms of what is always being verified.
We asked you, where do you think the greatest fraud risk exists in your source to pay process today? 55% of you said it's in payments and payment changes. 1/4 of you said invoice submission and processing. And 1 in 5 of you said it's in supplier onboarding or vendor master changes. All right, so show us how to plug those gaps, Miss Shelley Ann.
No problem. So here's a graphic, right? So these are the main areas within the source to pay lifecycle, right? We have supplier onboarding, we have sourcing and contracts, purchase orders, invoice processing, and payment execution. To be honest, what our analysis found is that supplier onboarding is ground zero for fraud. It's often the least scrutinized area, right? Ghost vendors are a thing, where vendors that don't exist, and they're controlled, like I mentioned before, by maybe somebody in procurement colluding with someone, and then they onboard a ghost vendor in order to get the money from you. Also, they also create duplicate vendor records, spoof the bank information similarly, so the vendor record looks the same, and they'll add a separate bank information to that to also get funds. Leveraging AI can take care of some of those validations for you. Under insourcing and contracts, right? There's bid rigging, where if you're not using a structured solution to handle your bidding process, people are able to post contract awards, change the terms, change the prices, right? And then if there's no validation after the fact, you're not able to know that the contract was probably awarded to someone incorrectly and then changed after the fact in order to facilitate that. Purchase orders are another area where we see a lot of that happening. There's maverick spend, purchase orders made outside of the approved process. There is managing the PO amount in order to avoid the organizational approval. That way they split the thresholds. Maybe you keep all your purchase orders under $10,000 so that they only flow to one person who's a part of the collusion, to be able to approve those, so that the higher ups don't see that there is an issue there with overspending. And in invoice processing, right, definitely represents the highest volume. Duplicated invoices are a huge one. Sometimes they're submitted months apart. Sometimes they're submitted with slight variations, especially in organizations where purchase orders are not used. I mean, I think that's a high ground for it, because oftentimes your approvers are approving so many invoices, they're not spending time looking into the details. So the human eye won't catch that, it's the same product, maybe a different month, a date on the invoice, a different invoice number, but it's the same product being invoiced against. And then we talked about business email compromise, right? Where a fraudster will email you an urgent change in bank information, or say something along the lines of, we really need you to wire this money instead of giving us an ACH this time. We don't care if you take a fee. One of the things that I think we probably all learned in our organization, and it's not different within the source to pay cycle, is that urgency is always a concern, especially if you have a vendor that you have regular terms with, and all of a sudden they're asking you to pay them super early. They're saying that they'll take a discount when that's not the agreement. I think some of those things are red flags to look out for. And then this is kind of how AI changes the game for us, right? If you look on the left of the screen, you'll see all the manual controls. They're often reactive. So the fraud is found, after the fact. We talked about that earlier, where we're seeing that it's being found 8 months later. When you do sample-based audits, which is kind of what I'm used to, when I started out, is that you're looking at, maybe 5 to up to 20% of the invoices. That does not guarantee that you're going to see the ones with issues. And then, years ago, source to pay wasn't really a thing. Procurement kind of worked on its own. AP worked on its own. Sometimes supplier onboarding worked with AP, sometimes with procurement. And when you have siloed systems, right, everyone's doing their thing and no one is noticing the consistent fraud across the board. That's the benefit of having, like a source to pay team, because everyone is kind of like focused on the same prize. So it's easier to identify kind of some of those gaps. And then, we're relying on the judgment of the employee. Every employee has different experience levels, right? And someone might identify something as fraud and someone else may not. So that leaves a big gap there. I think what happens with AI, right, continuous intelligence, is that AI flips every one of these dynamics, right? Instead of being reactive, you're now proactive. Anomalies are flagged before the payments are run. Instead of sampling, you absolutely have 100% of your invoices being covered and analyzed. Every invoice, every vendor, every transaction. And instead of silos, you have a unified view of risk across the entire source to pay workflow. And what's critical is that AI decisions are consistent and explainable. And that matters for audit and compliance. You're able to explain everything to the auditor when they come in. And in many of, in many AI-driven systems, you're able to even have like an auditor view. So you're able to just have the auditor see everything. It's, all the touches, all the decisions, points, all the dates, the timestamps are documented so that it's easily explainable to the auditor of why things happen. Like when an auditor asks why a payment was held, right? You have a risk score there, not a sticky note on a paper in a file cabinet saying, oh, this is why we did this in February. So I just think it provides more structure. It's clean, it's consistent, and it really gives you the 100% coverage versus the sampling that you're used to when you're using manual controls. So, at Esker, we use, several layers of AI in order to do to analyze invoices and to analyze all of our risk. In our source to pay environment, data is foundational, right? We focus on governance, ownership, accessibility, and we make sure that it focuses on long-term value and it exposes the risk so that you're able to make decisions. We use several different types of AI. There is machine learning, deep learning, generative AI, but for source to pay leaders, it's not kind of what type of AI is used. It's really how and where it creates value. And this is important because I think all of us hear AI all over the place, and everybody's doing AI and some kind of AI. I think what's key, especially in source to pay, is to make sure that the AI that you're leveraging in your process is able to use your foundational data, understand kind of what you're looking for, and it's not just some general high volume processing language model that will just kind of like spit out anything. It needs to be focused on source to pay. So, you should look for strong data governance and privacy. That's key, right? We're dealing with a lot of money, a lot of private information. You need AI that's designed specifically for source to pay. You need something that's scalable, sustainable, and with high performance. And it really needs to be seamlessly integrated into your process, right? Because it really is about precision, protection, and the purpose for which it's built. So just to give you a look across the entire source to pay cycle, where AI is leveraged and where it can give you better visibility and where it can enhance the process for you. You can see here in sourcing, right? If you're doing sourcing events, AI leveraged through the process can help you to create, the right questions to ask your suppliers, right? So it helps you to identify the right questions to ask based on the category. It also has like a sourcing agent that can manage the process for you. Within supplier management, and specifically what we consider supplier like inquiry management, it can also like query emails for you and kind of flag to you that a supplier is asking a question and the supplier may be upset, right? They're angry, they're threatening, to cancel service, so that you are able to focus in on that kind of work. It also is able to generate like responses so that it's able to respond to simple questions for you, or even stage a response that you can use to be able to, respond to your supplier. Within contracts, you can extract clauses and verify that you're being billed against kind of what the contract says. Within procurement, anomaly detection, that's a huge one, right? It can extract data from quotes and help to create a purchase requisition for you. And then, within the invoicing, which is, accounts payable, it can split batches for you. I'm sure all of us have experienced some kind, 300-page invoices where you probably only need data from page 1 to 4, but you probably need to keep all the documents. Leveraging AI can, actually scan that, grab the information for you, and archive the rest of the documents so that you're able to have that for your auditors. Invoice coding prediction is a huge one, especially in instances where you're not using a purchase order. So you don't have a purchase order to pull your invoice coding from. Leveraging AI in that manner will, the AI will look into your system, kind of see where the invoice was coded the last few times, or it can also look at what product or service you're purchasing and query that against your general ledger and recommend a general ledger account based on kind of what you're purchasing. And then for payment, it can do some of the supplier statement matching. I know I used to hate reconciling statements, especially if you're buying, if you have a high volume of invoices from suppliers. Reconciling those statements for month end can be painful. AI can help with that as well. You can pull in the statement, query your system, see what invoices were paid, what invoices you're missing, and again, stage a response to ask for those invoices, or identify to you that there may be a challenge here for something that you need to look into. And then one of the final things it does is kind of let you know that invoices that are pending payment are coming up due. So you potentially may incur a late payment. I think the big takeaway for me here is that what AI does here is that it partners with you and it flags things that are consistent and redundant and things that you should focus on. So it kind of helps you to plan your day. You get in the morning and there are items for you to focus on that could be high ticket items versus you having to work in some kind of chronological order and just focusing on kind of like the oldest thing that came in and work your way up. In my experience, that doesn't always work, but AI allows you to work smarter instead of, going through the motions per se. So I'm going to point out that maybe 3 or 4 use cases here specific to source to pay that, AI can help with. I think the first one is the supplier data validation. And, supplier data is often created or updated under time pressure. You hear from procurement that we need to buy this product tomorrow and you kind of need to get it to us today. Can you onboard a supplier? This is one of the reasons why supplier onboarding and supplier data validation is a prime target for fraud and error. AI strengthens the supplier data validation, right? By continuously reviewing the supplier records for inconsistencies, unusual changes or in data that doesn't align with historical patterns or peer suppliers. So once you onboard a supplier, in our partnership with VendorInfo, we're able to validate a lot of that information. And once the information is validated and the supplier is live, we are consistently monitoring for changes. Are they on the OFAC list now? Did something happen? Are we getting flagged for a bank change? So instead of checking the data once at onboarding, the AI keeps validating the supplier information over time, and this helps prevent issues before they ever reach to invoicing or payment. So I think this goes to your question earlier, Mark, where you're asking, like, could we do some of these validations up front? The answer is emphatically yes, we can. There is the opportunity to do that by leveraging this option. We see some issues again with duplicate supplier registrations, right? Where you have a supplier already registered. We talked about, potentially having some kind of collusion where they'll try to have the same supplier register again, potentially with different bank information so that they can kind of reroute the funds. Duplicate supplier records do not normally look obvious. They just show up as small variations, maybe a slightly different name, maybe instead of LLC at the end, it's Inc. Maybe the address format is different, or obviously the bank details. Leveraging AI in this process, it looks beyond the matches to identify probable duplicates based on patterns and relationships across the supplier data. And by catching these registrations early, organizations reduce the risk of like splitting spend or duplicate payments or fraudulent suppliers hiding in plain sight. This would be flagged. It would basically identify that someone needs to look at this because it doesn't look right. And this is kind of where it pulls in the human to say, I've done my check. I think this doesn't look okay. I want somebody else to look at this and say, is this okay or not? I went again in duplicate invoice detection, another high volume area where we see a lot of fraud. Duplicate invoices aren't always carbon copies. Fraudulent, you have, fraudsters as well as honest suppliers. Sometimes they may change an invoice number and say, hey, I made a change to this invoice and I'll put an A at the end. or they'll change the invoice format. And the line items and the core details of the invoice stays the same. Leveraging AI in this sense, the AI examines the full context of the invoice, not just the individual fields, and it flags and says this may be a duplicate. And this will allow a team member, again, to look into more detail. Maybe adding an A to the end of this invoice means it's the second half, or maybe it's a duplicate invoice, but it'll allow a human to come into the process and make a decision at that point. But it will surface it to you that something potentially is incorrect. And I think the final one I want to share with you is the unusual invoice amount detection. This one I think is probably one of the ones that I think is probably most important. And I say that because when I think of maybe like a utility bill, right? This may not necessarily be fraud, but this is something that you may want to be able to point out and account for. And when you're dealing with your finance partners, you may expect a utility bill to be $3,000 every month, right? But 1 month it comes in for $30,000. A human eye won't detect that very easily. What AI does for us here is to say, hey, this invoice came in at 30,000. All the other months I've seen it at 3,000. That's 10 times higher. You may want to take a look at this or reach out to the supplier, because a baseline has been established in the system to say this invoice normally comes in for $3,000. Why is it so high? Oftentimes, when you think about like a utility bill, maybe there's a water leak in the building. It could be something simple. May not even be fraud, or maybe they added a service onto your bill that you weren't aware of or no one approved. This kind of flags that for you. So it goes beyond fraud, right? This is probably more risk and more cost avoidance, right? To be able to identify this to your finance team. And by the way, I think one thing to consider is that these happen, I think, consistently across many companies. And just think about how it adds up if it's not identified, right? Imagine if this happens across 10 vendors 4 times a year. That, these could be in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. And depending on how much the fat fingering is, as I would like to call it, it could be millions, right? So it's definitely something to keep an eye out on. And then just for you guys, you could take a second here and just scan this QR code. So if you'd like to learn more about Esker, you can scan this QR code and you can see some more demos and seeing a lot more use cases than I've shown here. And it'll just take you to some of our source to pay demos, some more AP demos, and you can kind of see how we leverage AI throughout the system and how it helps to, abate some of those risks that you may experience in the process.
Let's move to the question. Yeah,
Sure.
oh, sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. You had
no worries.
slide.
I just want to do one little quick plug here. We do have our Esker All Access in Chicago on September 9th and 10th. I'll be hosting a couple of sessions there as well as my colleagues. Please feel free to reach out if you'd love to attend. We'd love to have you. You'll have access to not just me and the rest of my colleagues, but you also have access to other Esker customers, right? And it'll be an open forum for you to talk to them and kind of get their perspective on how everything works. And over to you
now
for
it's questions. Oh,
thank you guys for your time.
And if you haven't already submitted a question for Shelly Ann, or if you've thought of another question for Shelly Ann, go ahead, use that Q&A tool on your screen to submit your question to me now. We have a couple in the queue. We've got room for more. Wynn wants to know, do you have any best practices for mitigating the risk of falling victim to BEC attacks? Fastest growing form of electronic payments fraud, Shelly Ann? What advice would you give Wynn?
I would tell you that the time is now to invest in a system that does the bank account validations for you. I mean, that's really what it is. And I say that, so 2 things: supplier onboarding and bank validations. You should never accept a bank change over the phone. And we heard from nsKnox, even the callback process is no longer effective, right? You really need to invest in a system that does the validations for you. Not only will it make your process more efficient, but it helps to mitigate the amount of fraud that you're exposed to. And then I would say you need an automated supplier onboarding process. That whole 2-factor authentication with the supplier being able to log in on their own and make their changes avoids that too. Because ideally the supplier will have access to some kind of portal that you would have invested in, and they would go in and make their changes themselves. So there's no need for them to send you an email to make changes.
Yeah, Alexander writes in that his biggest concern is phishing emails. How does your solution help mitigate the risk of falling victim to these prevalent phishing schemes?
So the way our system works, and it's modular, but let's say if we would recommend that you have supplier onboarding, like I talked about. So there would be limited amounts of things that you would answer via email. So you would answer potentially, what's the status of my payment, right? There is almost like no harm in doing that, but we wouldn't change bank information via email, and we wouldn't also change email contacts via email. That would be managed through our supplier onboarding module. And then we would also do the bank validation through that same module as well.
Shelly Ann, thank you so much for an excellent presentation and for sharing all your insights with us today. I know that AI is a top of mind topic for many of our attendees, and I know that they appreciated the advice that you shared with them today.
Thank you
Uh,
so much.
as Assaf and Shelly Ann suggested, fraud schemes are evolving quickly. Unfortunately, in many cases, the payment processes and payment methods that we use haven't evolved as fast. And to show us how it is that we can redesign our payments for this new fraud first world in which we live, we're pleased to be joined by Bob Cohen of MasterCard. Hey, Bob, how are you today?
Hello, Mark. Hello, Phil. How's it going?
Hey, Bob, how are you?
Doing well here. Doing well. Yeah, pleasure to be here. Enjoyed the conversations with nsKnox and Esker here. So very good stuff. We're taking a little different perspective here. Kind of what I like about what Phil's put together here is it kind of triangulates fraud and takes a look at it from many different angles, which is what we need to do. Let me just share my screen here, and I will get going.
Looks good.
Okay, great. So yeah, happy to be here. Bob Cohen, I'm with MasterCard. I'm on our global partnerships team, and we look at how we can embed payments within B2B platforms. I've been here for several years. Prior to joining MasterCard, I was an industry analyst covering the source to pay space, and spent a lot of time looking at kind of procure to pay. But what I found out through my years in the industry was that most of the systems did procure to ready to pay, and they didn't actually get to that next point, which is actually what do we do with the payments? Most of them were sending a payment instruction file, or most systems were sending a payment instruction file to a bank, an issuer, or somebody else, but they weren't actually handling the payments themselves. And there's an opportunity really to kind of improve the process as we look along. And so one of the reasons I joined MasterCard was to kind of help kind of facilitate that movement along here. So we want to take a look at today's agenda here, kind of starting off with a kind of a context on the forces that are reshaping the B2B payments, as well as the scale of the fraud problem. And I think it's pretty prevalent that we have here. And then we'll kind of dig into why AP and AR teams are specifically targeted, and why they consistently fall short in the preparation and what they can do about that. And then we'll take a look at various payment methods and what they were designed for, and whether they're ready for the future in order to prevent fraudulent payments from occurring there. And then we'll kind of close with some practical use cases. And the slide that I created at the end, myth versus reality, is actually kind of one of my favorites. So looking forward to getting to that. I'm sure, as Mark has said, please feel free to ask questions as we go along, and we'll get to them as we move in. So I mentioned I was an analyst before this, so I love my data. So got a couple slides here on taking a look at the data that we have here. And we wanted to look at, when you look at payments, you need to look at the supply side and the buy side, because payments affects both sides of the fence there. Someone's buying, someone's selling. Somebody who's buying something, what do they want to do? They want to hold on to their cash as long as possible. Somebody who's selling something wants to shorten the time that it takes for them to get paid. So buyers want to extend out DPO, sellers want to reduce day sales outstanding. So we took a look at some data in the market here. We found out there's a huge amount of inefficiency within the supply chain. There's $1.3 trillion that's locked up in working capital. And there's better ways to manage our cash that'll benefit both the suppliers and the buyers here. Although there's a number of challenges that are faced on the sell side. If payments aren't received, if someone steals those payments, if they're redirected, as Shelly Ann was just talking about, there it goes to the wrong place. What happens? That puts those suppliers at risk of going out of business, because many small suppliers live hand to mouth. They need to receive payment for their goods or services. And if they don't, it can severely impact their organizations. And what we saw in some of the data is that up to 50,000 small businesses go out every year, due in part to receiving late payments or not receiving payments at all. For suppliers, late payments are common. 81% don't really have great visibility into when payments are going to be received. On the buy side of the fence, what we've seen is that payments to suppliers can put those relationships at risk if you keep pushing out when those suppliers are going to get paid, or if they don't get paid. If a payment is misdirected, it has a serious impact on the other side of the fence there. And also what we're looking at is that 30% of resources on the AR side of the fence and the AP side of the fence are spent handling payments. So some of the challenges, additional challenges that we have here, paper is still prevalent. I know Phil and Mark and I go way back, and we've been talking about paper invoices and the challenges with them for a million years. And, sadly, it still exists. There's a better way, but there's still much paper that exists in the system, both in invoice processing and purchase order requests, as well as payments. And so there's a huge opportunity to improve that process there. We talked about working capital there, lack of visibility and control. If you don't know what's going on, and fraudsters do, it leaves you exposed. Payment challenges, as I mentioned, can lead to a huge inequity between buyers and suppliers, and it can impact relationships and impact businesses. And finally, what we're talking about here today, most importantly, is kind of cyber and risk and how it comes into play with payments today. When we take a look at risk, over 80% of organizations faced payment fraud attacks in 2023. Now, honestly, I think that number is probably low, because I think every organization today is facing fraud attempts. It's whether or not they have systems in place that can protect them, or whether or not they know these are even going on. And so the takeaway from that is payment fraud's widespread. Another study by the AFP in 2026, their payments fraud and control study, took a look at 76% of organizations experience attempted or actual fraud. So we can see that it's staying consistent. The data you're seeing on screen here says 80%. It's down to 76%. But I firmly believe, based upon conversations I've had with practitioners at corporates, that it's probably closer to 100%. Everyone faces attacks. It's how many are successful and how many are known there. What's interesting is that AFP data also showed that 91% of businesses are still using checks. This is up from 75% in just the year before. This number is just kind of counterintuitive to me. I don't know if it's kind of data bias, but it's still amazing that many organizations are using checks, and we'll get to it. And why am I bringing this up? Because checks are just ripe for fraud. There's a huge opportunity for fraudsters to take physical checks and use them for their own devices. We were just talking, or Shelley-Ann was just talking about business email compromise as the top catalyst for payment diversion. And what's important to note here is that attackers don't need to break into systems in order to change emails. They kind of exploit the trust and process gaps that exist there. So if you're not preventing this from happening, you're leaving yourself exposed for potential fraud. So, mentioned before, payments fraud is widespread. It's all over the place. It occurs with not only paper checks, with business email compromise, with ACH. The data is out there. So, what can we do about this? Well, first off, we took a look at, why AP and why AR? Well, they handle the money. One sends the money, one receives the money. So obviously, fraudsters know exactly who to target. They're not going to target a group that doesn't get in the flow of funds. They're going to target the ones that do. And when you take a look at these departments and really kind of understanding, what's being targeted here, fraudsters study payment patterns. They know what suppliers are getting paid on a regular basis and a consistent amount, and they can go and create diversionary tactics to change where those monies are being sent there. Manual approvals and process exceptions. We've been talking about automating AP, automating AR, for decades now, and yet it still goes on, and we still have many manual processes that are rampant throughout organizations, large and small. Things like rush payments, new vendor setups, one-off payments, that long tail of suppliers, where you're just making one payment there, and it's that 80-20 rule where 80% of your payments go to 20% of your suppliers, but conversely there, 80% of your payments are often case one-time supplier payments, and these are hugely opportunistic areas for fraudsters to attack there. Also, when you take a look at static payment details and dependence on emails for routing around bank account numbers, things, sensitive data that lives in spreadsheets, these are all areas that are ripe for fraud, and something really kind of needs to be done about it. And the common thread here is that there's workflow vulnerabilities and not technology vulnerabilities. So technology exists to prevent much of this fraud, but it's not being leveraged by many AP and AR professionals there. So some of the scams, I know the previous presenters have spoken about this, invoice redirection and vendor change scams. An attacker impersonates a known supplier and sends updated banking information. I've seen this happen too many times. I've talked to too many people who've experienced this. And what Assaf from nsKnox was talking about, I actually had a real case from a health agency in the UK who actually received a call, and it sounded just like their usual contact, but wisely or fortunately, the person on the other end of the phone at the health system knew the contact and said there was something off in their language. And so they brought it up, they reported it to Scotland Yard, and it turned out the fraud was actually being perpetuated by organized crime. So the fraudsters are getting better. And so we need to get better ourselves as well. Check theft and alteration. If you're mailing a check, thieves know about this. They intercept checks in transit. They watch them to remove, payee information, rewrite it for larger amounts. And the U.S. Postal Service reports that check theft is surging nationwide. So if you're still using checks, why? We take a look at ACH payment diversion. Once an attacker obtains routing and account numbers, they can initiate unauthorized debit or redirect scheduled payments, and static credentials make this possible. Right. So, why do some of these exist? Why do some of the legacy payment systems, fall short? Because Controls detect the issues after the payment executes. And as we all know, once money is out of your bank account, whether it's your personal bank account, your corporate bank account, it's really difficult to get that money back. And it's usually a race against time because fraudsters know what they're doing. And if the money's taken out of one account, it's very often moved to another account and another account. So tracing it and getting involved in the time involved in, when can we recover something? Even, once we figured out that we've detected a fraudulent payment occurred, these systems were really not designed for recovery or, prevention. After the fact is not the way to go. We need to work on systems that prevent fraud from happening in the first place, not detecting it after the fact. Talked about ACH and some static credentials, account numbers, routing numbers, not only in ACH, but also on check stock, that don't change between transactions can be reused. So one successful fraud attack can lead to many more because fraudsters very often will go in for a small amount. And then if that's not caught, they continually go back and start taking out more and more money. So if your details are static or exposed, you're leaving yourself at risk. And, sadly, as I alluded to before, recovery rates are really low. Once the money leaves your account, once you find out about it, there's time parameters with ACH payments that can limit recovery. And with checks, money that come out of an account, they move around, as I said, and it's really difficult to get that money back. I think, somewhere around maybe 50% of money is actually recovered. So you don't want to be on the other side of that. Domestic ACH is one thing. If you're talking about international wires with corresponding banks and, the money being routed in multiple places, the recovery rates are even lower. So kind of taking a look at what I mentioned here, fraud's a payment design problem. If we're detecting it, we're looking for it after the fact, it's too late in most cases there. We want to make sure that what we're doing is bringing the process before the payment ever occurs, making sure that we're validating who and what is being sent. And so we take a look at, how we can change things here. One of the areas that kind of flip the script is virtual cards, kind of, what this session is all about here, what it kind of alludes to here. And virtual cards kind of flip the model that I've been talking about here, because most of the frauds that occur today exploit the legacy rails, whether it's the check and the banking rails that exist there, ACH rails that are there. Sophisticated attacks don't need sophisticated technology. They need payment methods that were designed for convenience and not security. The rails themselves are the challenges that we're facing. So what is a virtual card? If this was a live interactive session, I would ask how many folks are using virtual cards and how many folks know about this, but just kind of a quick primer on virtual cards. A virtual card is a unique 16-digit card number that's generated for a specific transaction or supplier relationship. You can think of it as a purpose-built payment instruction rather than a standing account credential. So these virtual cards are designed for single use or tightly limited. So each number is configured to work once. There can be virtual cards that you can use for recurring payments, but what happens then is if we're paying a specific supplier every month, it's for a specific amount. Once that virtual card has been authorized and charged for that, that card can no longer be used again until the next parameter you sent in there. So virtual cards are locked to a specific supplier, a specific time, a specific amount, a specific merchant code, whatever it may be. So if by chance someone received a virtual card, a fraudster received this, it really wouldn't matter because the chance that they can do anything with it is extremely minimal because it's set up for a specific time, specific account, whatever it is. And most importantly, no bank account details are exposed here whatsoever. So unlike checks or ACH, virtual cards never reveal underlying bank account or routing numbers. The supplier receives a card number, and your banking account details stay protected. So, how do virtual cards reduce fraud? No reusable credentials, contrary to what ACH or check payments are looking at there. Transaction level controls, which are enforced by the network. If a virtual card was intercepted, as I mentioned, a fraudster can't take that card and use it somewhere else. It's extremely limited, it's extremely protected there. And, it's designed for a specific purpose, a specific payment. And let's say, how does that payment go out? All of the data is tokenized, which protects any sensitive data that might be included within that virtual card payment there. So the ability for a fraudster to get access to that token, to get access to any data that may be within that payment is extremely unlikely. So, just kind of hammering home again, contrasting this with checks. There's a huge difference. One is purpose-built for a specific payment, does not expose details, and the other one does, or the other ones do. So I know we've talked about this, and many of you are probably familiar with this. When we're taking a look at physical checks, physical checks can be stolen, they can be altered, they can be reused. And once a check is deposited, extremely difficult to recapture any of those funds there as well. Fraudsters know what they're doing. They're good at this. So, paper checks, there's ways to eliminate them from any payments that are being made. If you're on the supply side and you're receiving paper checks, you can talk to your buyers and say, listen, we no longer accept paper checks as forms of payments. We want a different digital structure here too. And why is that? Because once a payment gets stolen, there's cost for everybody on both sides that can be avoided. We take a look at ACH, and we talked about this as well. ACH credentials can be reused. So once they're compromised, you're at risk there as well. The use of static routing and account numbers enable fraudsters to, once they have access to this, to perpetuate fraud on an ongoing basis. Once those funds have been taken out of a bank account, it's very difficult to get them reversed. ACH reversals, have strict time windows and require bank cooperation. International ACH transfers are even harder to claw back. So, there's challenges with all of these legacy payment methods that don't exist within virtual cards there. With virtual cards, taking a look here, once again, they're purpose-built for a single use. The amount and who's being paid, when is being paid, where is being paid. There's controls that enable you, when you send out that payment, to engage them. So you're not worried about that card being stolen and being used, because fraudsters who get access to this, can't do anything with it. And once again, there's nothing valuable to steal here. So you're preventing the payment fraud from happening, and you're not worrying about that payment being sent out and then someone stealing that or being exposed to that. So you're doing prevention, not detection here. Kind of the use case here, kind of talked about this, so just in the sake of time and questions and trying to get to the Q&A section here. One thing we haven't talked about was reconciliation. When you're leveraging virtual cards can be embedded within these B2B platforms they're using, whether it's an AP, AR system, whether it's an ERP system. So the reconciliation happens automatically. So not only is a benefit to the organization from a fraud and working capital management perspective, it's also a benefit from a time-saving perspective too. And you also have accurate data that's here. On the AR side of the fence, what's the use case when we're looking at virtual cards? You get immediate authorization. You receive those funds immediately into your accounts there. You reduce the DSOs I spoke about previously, and I don't know, most importantly, but very important is fewer disputes. When you get paid, you know what you're going to get paid. You know that the funds are there and the funds are deposited there, so it leads to much fewer disputes from AR having to contact AP saying, why did I get paid this amount and where? On the supply side, taking a look at card payments, virtual card payments for suppliers. As I mentioned, suppliers receive payment faster into their accounts. There's straight through processing, commercial direct payments. So when a buyer receives a payment from, a supplier receives a payment from a buyer, those funds can be automatically deposited into that supplier's bank account. You have payment certainty. You know what you're getting, and you know when you're getting it. The efficiency, as I mentioned, the reconciliation, that happens only on the buy side. When you send a payment, you say this payment went out for this amount on this date for this invoice or whatever it may be, but that information can be provided to the supplier too. So once again, that reconciliation is huge amounts of saving that's there as well. And it's a much more secure type of payment that's built for today. On the buy side of the fence here, many of the same benefits apply here, but we're reducing costs. The cost to send out a virtual payment is minimal when compared with the cost of sending out a paper check. When you add everything up, from a fraudulent perspective, a process perspective, it's significantly less. And one thing that many don't realize, when you're paying your suppliers, your long tail suppliers, any supplier, with a check, the AP department needs to create the 1099 form for that payment. And however, when you're using a virtual card, it eliminates the need for the AP department to create that 1099 for that non-employee labor. That falls on the issuer to issue that 1099. So it can be a huge time savings in addition to the other benefits that are here. What I've seen here since I joined, adoption is accelerating. All the major platforms either have this available or are looking at implementing embedded payments within their systems today. So likelihood of whatever AP, AR system, ERP system you're using today, they have the capability to embed payment capabilities directly within their platform. And on the other side, you say, well, what about the supplier acceptance side? We're seeing a significant increase in supplier acceptance. We have programs. All of the B2B platforms are working to engage more and more suppliers. And the good news is, once one supplier is onboarded for one buyer, it can be used by other buyers as well there. So we're seeing tremendous growth, not only us, but in the data that we're seeing from the industry pundits there, of adoption and use across the board here. And this is not only with mid-market enterprise organizations, but also in the SME segment also. So kind of a few words of advice, take a look at your AP spend file, identify which payments are much more prone to fraud, check, ACH, one-time payments, etc. And, start focusing on those and work on those, because that's the low-hanging fruit. And, remember that if you're working to detect fraud after a payment's been made, it's usually too late to do that. So if you look to embed the prevention within your systems, prevent fraud from occurring, it's a much more effective use of time. So kind of my last slide here, Mark, and then I'll turn it over back to you there. Kind of putting together this deck here, first myth, fraud requires systems to be hacked. The answer is no. We're talking business email compromise. We're talking people calling in. The reality is that most fraud exploits, the normal AP and AR workflows. They're not hacking into systems. Doesn't mean it doesn't happen, but the majority of what we see, and the data out there supports this, is that there's processes that are broken. There's data that's exposed. There's flaws in the current systems that exist there. Second myth, strong approval policy, stop fraud. Once again, the reality is that if you're using static payment credentials, they can be used to override approvals, once changed. Final myth there, faster payments increase fraud risk. The answer is no. Transaction level controls actually work to reduce fraud exposure. Just because you're paying somebody fast doesn't mean that speed means that you're exposing yourself to fraud. To the contrary, if you're leveraging payment methodologies that are built on rails that were designed to prevent fraud from ever happening, the speed with which that transaction occurs, that money is transferred, is irrelevant to the conversation. So, key takeaways, and then Mark, I promise back to you. Fraud thrives on static payments. Virtual cards can help shift the control upstream, prevent it from ever happening. And then AP and AR, the folks listening to this, are in the driver's seat. They can be strategic to the organization, and they can lead the prevention from ever happening. So with that, Mark, I'm going to turn it back to you.
Yeah, if you have any questions for Bob, or if you've thought of another question for Bob, go ahead, use that Q&A tool on your screen to submit your question to me now. We'll answer as many questions as time allows. Our first question up is from Lisa. Lisa says, a lot of suppliers do not like virtual cards because they do not like to pay the fees. What can we do to encourage suppliers to go that route?
Sure, great question. It's one that we hear all the time or frequently hear. It's a conversation with a supplier is, comes down to terms as well. If the supplier says, we don't like to accept virtual cards, and the typical terms are 30 or 60 days, and you're getting paid on day 30 or day 60, you say, okay, well, what if we paid you with a virtual card and we could pay you on day 5, right? And so now you have access to that capital, which I talked about earlier, to put back into use for your organization there as well. So you have a working capital component here. Also, if you are accepting different forms of payments, what's the cost to process that payment? If you're actually, that buyer sends the payment to you via check, you have to wait for that check to arrive. You have to deposit that. You have to wait for the funds to clear. You run the risk of, some of the fraud we talked about occurring there. So there's lots of conversations we have. There's lots of different ways to engage your suppliers to say, yes, there's a cost of doing business, but when you take a look at the benefits that you receive, the ability to have, predictability on what your day's sales outstanding is going to look like, your ability to greatly minimize or eliminate fraud from ever occurring there as well. The ability to have automatic reconciliation of banking information, the ability to improve the working capital for your organization so you receive the funds sooner. Those are conversations I would have with those suppliers, and it's something that we do all the time.
We'll leave it there. Bob, thank you so much for an excellent presentation and for sharing your insights with us today. There's no question we need to evolve our defenses from reactive to proactive, and that was some great advice on how folks can do it. Well, we've talked a lot today about the schemes that organizations are experiencing. We thought we'd share with you some lessons from the front lines. And so we've brought together 2 AP practitioners to share with you firsthand accounts of the types of schemes they're experiencing and what it is they're doing to mitigate their risks. I'm pleased to invite in now Carolyn Goodman, the Director of Accounts Payable for American Senior Communities, as well as Jill Fristow, the Assistant Controller for Asbury Communities. Hey, Jill. Hey, Carolyn. How are you today?
Hi, Mark. Doing great.
That's
Can't wait
great.
to talk about fraud.
Well, my goodness, we can't wait to hear what you have to say about fraud. But before we dive into that topic, I thought I'd give each of you a few moments to tell you a little bit about, tell us a little bit about your organization and your role. Carolyn, you're first on my screen, so I'm going to start with you.
Okay. I am Carolyn Goodman. I work for American Senior Communities. I've been here for 24 years. American Senior Communities is the largest nursing home management company in the state of Indiana. We have nursing homes, assisted livings, garden homes. We have hospice, a palliative care. We have approximately 120 locations. So we take care of a lot of people.
I was going to say that is awesome. Thanks for joining us, Jill.
Yes, I'm Jill Fristow, Assistant Controller at Asbury Communities. Asbury is a not-for-profit senior living organization, very similar to Carolyn's organization. And we were founded in 1926. And I'm very proud of that because this year, later in October, we're celebrating our 100th anniversary. So I'm very
Wow.
Happy
proud to work
birthday.
for
That is
Asbury. Thank
awesome.
you. Don't I look good
Yeah.
for 100?
Not a day over 29, Jill.
You.
Although I'll tell you, fraud can age us all.
Hey,
And
covering up my grays here. Yeah.
well, I used to have hair before this all started. Carolyn, you've been at this a while. How has fraud changed over the past several years, in your opinion?
For us, honestly, it didn't really, it wasn't on our radar like years ago. I mean, we would get a W-9 from a vendor and we'd set them up in the system. That's just what we did. And now, oh my, no, you've got to verify everything. And as Jill knows, being in healthcare, we have so many more regulations with Medicare, Medicaid, and so many other verifications that need to be done. It has changed so much.
Yeah. How about you, Jill? What would you say is the biggest change in fraud these days compared to a few years back?
It's moving at the speed of light.
Mm.
So with the increase that we see in AI, agentic AI agents, chatbots, and the like, it always seems like the fraudsters are one step ahead of me. So when I think back even 3 years ago, because we implemented VendorInfo in 2023, we were using paper-based forms, just what Carolyn said, that you get a W-9 form, you set the vendor up in the system, no fuss, no muss. I would not think of doing that nowadays. It's terrifying to me what we used to do, and we didn't seem to be affected adversely by it. So there's so many more controls that we go through now and so many different checks. And I think my BFFs at Asbury are the IT group, in particular the cybersecurity group. I seem to interact with these people almost on a daily basis, sadly.
Yeah. What concerns you the most, Carolyn, about the environment that you just described?
For us, well, using VendorInfo has been a godsend for us because, like I said, with just getting the W-9 and, we would verify their tax ID number, but now we can verify so much more, especially with the ACH information. We require every vendor to sign up for ACH. So, and to be transparent, when we first started, we would just take the vendor's word for it. Whatever information they were putting into VendorInfo, if it matched, we went with it. And we have tightened that up a lot because thank goodness we haven't had any fraud that we know of, but nothing's happened yet. But now we require our vendors to supply us a copy of a canceled check or a letter from their bank, something to back up what they're entering into the system. So we are asking our vendors for a lot more detailed information than we used to.
Yeah. Is that similar to what keeps you up at night, Jill, when it comes to these fraud schemes these days?
It is. It really is. So just to echo what Carolyn said, we obviously use VendorInfo and really appreciate that bank check. And we implemented, I think it was a year and a half, 2 years ago. We're now, in addition to that, doing test deposits. So every
Oh,
new vendor that comes through there and our legacy vendors that we're trying to convert from paper checks to ACH payments, we run them through VendorInfo. We send them test deposits. We call to confirm. We do not email. We call and talk to a human to have the test deposit confirmed. If they refuse to confirm it, they're not going to be my vendor. For our legacy vendors who we're trying to convert to ACH, we charge them a $100 paper check processing fee every time I cut a paper check and put it in the mail to them.
I
And
like
if you make it hurt, they will convert. See, that rhymes. Catchy, isn't
look
it?
at
like
that.
it.
We're going to steal. We're going to steal that one. Do you get much? I know this isn't a check discussion necessarily, but I'm curious. Do you get much pushback the first time you
We
sock them
do,
with that $100 fee?
especially from the smaller vendors. And I simply say, this is
That
great.
hurts.
I can get you your money the same day or the very next day if you provide me with your banking info. You don't have to go to the bank. You don't have to run it through the check scanner. It's lovely. So most of them feel the same way. We do have our ACH compliance up to about 79, 80% or so. So I feel pretty good about that. One of
That
my
is pretty good.
challenges is getting payments out to utility vendors because we have
Mm.
shared vendors across many of our communities. So if you send Comcast one payment, they will not apply it correctly across all your vendors, all your customer numbers, I should say. So
That's a
there's still
webinar
some
for another
challenges.
day.
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
yes. I caught the tail end of the MasterCard presentation. I'm thinking I might need to use one of those payment methods.
Exactly. Bob knew what he was talking about.
He did.
Carolyn, throughout today's event, we've heard from our speakers about all the different types of schemes and scams that are out there these days, and it is really frightening in many respects. I'm curious, in your operation, what's the most common type of fraud scheme that you encounter?
Well, oddly enough, just earlier this week, I had one day that I was emailing back and forth multiple times with my vice president of IT. And it was very odd. In the afternoon, I got an email from him. It just didn't look right. I mean, I'd been emailing with him all day, and this one came through, and I was like, his email is under his name, Mike. And this came saying Michael.
Wow.
And it just didn't look right. So I got to looking at it a little closer, and they had mirrored everything, our logo, everything. Only thing that caught it was they put Michael. So I sent it to IT, this like, hey, I think this is a scam or something. And, they flagged it immediately and then blocked whatever they do on their side. But these scammers are getting so sophisticated with what they can do. And, how did they even get that information? Where did they get into our system? Did they get one of our emails somehow? How did they know, to grab our logo? And it's just scary of what they can do. So our IT department is very well versed in all this, and we work with them very closely when things like that come through. Um, so anytime we get anything, we just shoot it to them and go, "Hey, is this legit?"
That's yeah, and I mean that's really half the battle in AP, right? We're people pleasers. We're rule followers. We want to
Amen.
we want to get things done, but we need to be empowered to say, hold on a second here, or no in some cases. And Jill, you painted the picture, I think, spot on when you were talking about all the technologies that are available these days. It's got to be harder to detect the types of scams as Carolyn's example illustrated. Talk to me about that, and how does your team be able to pick up on the phony
We
ones?
we turned what we used to do on its head. Instead of believing most things, we now assume almost everything is fake. And I am spoiled by my IT department. We have this lovely little phishing button in our Outlook. So if
Yes.
there's any type of suspicious email, all I have to do is click that little button and it's gone and they will handle it. But what we see coming through, just like Carolyn, where normally it would say Mike on her email and it said Michael, we look for that. We look for um, wording and uh, uh, phrasation that's different outside the United States. For example, there's some words in Europe where they put like an E at the end, or
Mhm.
they phrase differently in another country. So we look for items like that. We look for missing or added characters in the email address. But now we also have to worry about not just business email compromises, but phishing. So you may not have heard of phishing, but now AI can mirror somebody's voice. So if your phone rings and you think you're talking to your bank, you may not be. So I will throw out the example of Randy Travis. So he had a stroke in 2013 and can't speak very well. Well, in 2024, I think it was, AI took snippets of his voice from over the years and created a brand new song. And you cannot tell the difference between that song and his actual voice. So now we have to worry about that too. And don't forget about social engineering. These fraudsters will get into your systems and your email and to your people any way that they can.
Yeah, in many cases, we put that information right out there, right? They can go
Hmm.
on our LinkedIn profiles to see who we're connected to and who we're doing business with.
Well, yeah,
Yeah,
and
go
now
ahead, Carolyn.
with AI, just last week at the IOFM conference, they were talking about, how you were talking about, there could be misspellings or different languages and whatnot. With AI now, they can even fix that where it just looks
You just know.
completely okay. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's scary.
It's part
You
of the
need your,
problem. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, you need your spidey senses. So
Yes.
that's something AI can never take over. If
Mhm.
your spidey senses are tingling and the hairs go up in the back of your neck, stop what you're doing. Question
Jill,
it.
this was actually the question I was about to ask you too. It seems to me that back in the day, we used to lean pretty hard on our seasoned AP folks, right? The folks who've been with us forever,
Yeah,
and they just
exactly.
intuitively knew when something wasn't quite right because they knew our suppliers. They knew when they built us. They knew how much they built us. They knew what we were buying from them.
You get
We've
an
had some,
email, it's the same joke you've heard 50 times, but that's the
but we knew that
familiarity.
that's so and so.
That's
But
exactly.
now we've had some turnover in AP, and those folks aren't with us anymore. And these schemes now are so sophisticated that they kind of anticipate this. So it's harder these days, isn't it, Jill, to just be able to figure out what's real and what's not?
It absolutely is, and I'm scared about so many things, including the business email compromise. But what also terrifies me is getting fake invoices into my system. So we
Hmm.
do have a decentralized AP process. So I have about 15, 18 different email addresses that ingest all the invoices,
Hmm.
and they're not top secret. It's not too hard for a hacker to figure out what these email addresses are. And if they're smart enough and perhaps use some of the technology that's out there, they can mirror one of our current vendors' invoices. And that's what makes me very, very scared. That's where it's very, very difficult to detect. So we go through multiple levels of review where we have folks, humans, that are visually looking at the invoices and should be able to recognize consistencies and inconsistencies. And we use the technology that's available to the fullest extent that we can. But it's a new hard world out there, and the controls that we used even 3 or 4 years ago may not work today. So we have to evolve with our controls as fast as the fraudsters evolve on the offensive side.
I love this. I love this conversation, Carolyn. What types of changes have you made to your processes or controls, as Jill was saying, to help be able to detect some of these scams and schemes?
So with the system we use DataServe as our invoice processing system, and it has so much transparency for us. We see who is emailing in the invoice, so we can see, every invoice that's come in for that vendor, and if all of a sudden it starts coming from a Gmail when it's been coming from an actual company email, that would be a red flag to us. However, for us, we do business with a lot of mom and pops and individuals. So we do get a lot of emails, Gmail, Hotmail, things like that. But if it's consistently from that same email, we're pretty secure that it's okay. But we have, thousands upon thousands of vendors. So it is hard to keep track of all of them. But with our email, we have one email that that's the only email that's used, so everybody has to email it, and we want to think it's kind of secret, but the only people who have it are people out in the field who give that email address to a vendor. So we have had scam invoices come through. We keep getting one from Geek Squad, and it's coming from a Gmail, and we have no idea how he got our super secret email. But yeah, and he keeps trying. He keeps sending it. I guess he thinks eventually somebody's going to give in and try to pay him. But yeah, it's just the little things like that you can watch in your system for, who it's coming from and things like that.
Jill, you mentioned a few moments ago that you've implemented vendor info. We talked about this at the very top of today's event, and that is that, folks tend to focus on, the payment as fraud mitigation, right? Did it get approved? But the reality is a lot of this exposure starts right at the very beginning when we onboard the supplier or make changes to the supplier's data. Talk to me about what you're doing at Asbury to mitigate your risks around supplier onboarding and then changes to supplier information.
So utilizing vendor info has been hugely helpful. So instead of having a paper vendor onboarding form, we've moved to vendor info. We have a pretty detailed part of the form that one of the employees that I work with will fill out and send it to the vendor so they can use the secure link to reply to us. One of those pieces of information on that form is the expected annual spend with the vendor. If it's above a certain dollar amount, it goes through 2 to 3 additional levels of review. So we don't do I don't want to say we don't do a full review. We don't do additional procedures for a vendor where they think it's only going to be about $5,000. But when the dollar amounts get up there, we do. And those additional controls include verifying the vendor to the Secretary of State's website to make sure their business license is current and active and in good status. We review the social media posts, we review their website, we look up information on the internet to see if there's any negative reviews, negative information, and we vet the vendor in that manner as well. Vendors also do go through supply chain management, and what they're looking for is, do we already have a vendor? So if we get another vendor for, say, office supplies, that vendor will immediately be denied. So some of these requests don't even get to the second tier, which is the accounts payable process. But again, just like banks want to know their customer and you practically have to give a DNA sample when you want to open a new bank account, we try to make sure that we are vetting these vendors to the fullest extent that we can.
Yeah. How often are you actually flagging vendors for the types of issues that you kind of ticked through there?
I would say at least probably a dozen or so a month. I
Wow.
had I had one particular vendor, it was a construction vendor, and they didn't even know their business license had expired. And I very politely told them, well, you better get it in order, otherwise I'm not paying you and you're not getting onboarded. So it took about 3 days, but they did.
You broke the news to them. Carolyn,
Yes.
we heard earlier about phony bank account change requests. Talk to me about what it is you're doing at your organization to try to mitigate the risk of those slipping through the cracks.
Yeah, so, like I said, our facilities, which are the ones who actually email out the vendor info link to the vendors. So it starts with, we feel secure that usually in our facilities, there's an actual vendor standing in front of them to
Hmm.
give them that information because there's somebody actually there at the facility to have the work done or whatnot. So that we feel secure that the link is being given to the actual vendor. So when the vendor completes everything in vendor info, like I said, we require that they give us a copy of a canceled check or a letter from their bank giving their account information so we can verify that through vendor info to make sure that it all verifies. If it doesn't verify, of course, first thing we do is we'll go back to the vendor and call them. Absolutely, we don't want to email because we don't know who we're emailing, and get them on the phone and make sure that did you submit this? That it wasn't a fraudster trying to change their account and things like that. So yeah, it's just making sure we get all the documentation that we can to verify everything.
Carolyn, I'm curious, were there some gaps you saw in your previous process before vendor info that made you think I've got to get an automated solution in here? Were there some things in particular that
Oh,
made
yes,
you nervous, anxious,
absolutely.
upset, sick to your
Yes.
stomach?
Our our previous process was we had a 13-page vendor onboarding packet. And that
That's all?
packet, oh yeah, just 13. And the vendor, it would just be mailed to them by snail mail, not even email at that point. So they would get it, they would have to complete everything. They're handwriting everything.
Oh no.
So, which is great to try to decipher a lot. Then they would mail it back to our facility because that's who they're doing business with. The
Right.
facility would then have to send all that information to us. We would have to do all the verifications, manually set it up in the system. So it could take weeks to get a vendor set up to where now with vendor info, I mean, depending on, if the vendor opens the link the day they get it and they get it to me, that vendor's approved within a day.
My goodness. So we had snail mail, paper forms, handwritten text, and manual workflows. I think you can't possibly make that process any worse, Carolyn. I
No,
don't know.
yeah, it was bad. It definitely needed an upgrade.
Yeah, I could imagine. Jill, talk to me about how it is that you're layering in training your people into this whole process. I mean, after all, technology alone isn't going to beat these types of scams we're talking about. What are you doing to keep your staff up to date on all the schemes and
We
scams out there?
My accounts payable manager and I try to scare our staff at least monthly. So we try to keep them up to date on real life examples of what has literally occurred at our company, attempts that fraudsters have made and sometimes been successful at, most times not, made trying to get into our systems, get us to issue payments. And we also have formal training that's done through an online system that all associates are required to take. And we have guest speakers. So we have our Thrival Tech IT support group speaking to us as well. So this is like direct communication between our cybersecurity group and the accounts payable and treasury services teams, where we can ask them specific questions like, what are you seeing? What do we really have to be on the alert for? But again, the fraudsters are moving at the speed of light, and we need to learn to keep up. And the other thing that we try to convey to everyone in the teams is no one is ever going to fault you for saying no. So if you want to say no and you think that something's wrong, then speak up. If a payment is delayed a week or a day, if the vendor doesn't get onboarded Thursday and it's Monday, that is just fine. I would rather be safe than sorry. And that's how we all feel at Asbury. We want to keep the company and our financial as well as our reputational assets secure.
Really is key, isn't it, Carolyn? Creating
Mhm.
this culture where people feel comfortable saying, hold on a second here. What are you doing at American senior communities to try and empower your staff to mitigate risk?
Yeah, so I'm very fortunate. My staff and I have all been together even before American Senior Communities. So we've been together for over 25 years, and we've all
Wow.
been, yeah, and we've all been in
This is a
AP.
family for crying out loud.
It is. We all worked at a bank together. I came to ASC first, and then I've brought all of them here. Um, so we're all very well versed in AP and what to look for. And since we've all been here forever, it is very fortunate that we know the system in and out. But that doesn't mean something can't sneak in or something can't happen.
Mhm.
But we do. I have a meeting scheduled next week where I'm going to go over everything I learned at IOFM with them, so they can know the latest and greatest of what's going on out in the world and what the fraudsters are doing and how much AI has evolved, even just in the past 6 months, from what I heard at the last conference to this one. Huge change in just 6 months of what they've
Yeah.
done. So it's just educating your people, keeping them up to date. Communication is always key, and just keeping the lines of communication open with your people.
Carolyn, I was struck by what Jill was talking about, the collaboration with the different stakeholders in the organization. I reckon you're doing the same thing. What does good collaboration, not just with your AP team, but stakeholders in general? What do you think that looks like in practice today in this fraud environment?
So for us, we do work closely with our purchasing department. They are actually the first approver when something comes into vendor info. They're
Oh,
the
interesting.
ones that are kind of vetting, you know, do we have a vendor who already provides these services? And if they do, they'll, reject the vendor and tell the facility, hey, you can use this vendor. Um, our purchasing department also does most of the contracts and does a lot of the communications with any vendors that we're setting up. So they kind of already know they're expecting to see a new vendor request for this vendor. So we do work closely with them. We also work very closely with our treasury department. Of course, they're the ones seeing all the funds coming in and out of the bank account. So if something comes in or, somebody happens more times than we like to admit. People are trying to deduct money from the account. It always seems to be a utility too. Comcast is great. Somebody's always trying to pay their Comcast account with our account somehow. So our treasury department is going, did you pay this? And it's like, nope, that wasn't us. So they can, stop that before it ever, comes in and posted to the account. So it's definitely a whole accounting team, collaboration, purchasing, treasury, AP, and my staff accountants. They see the after effect of after we've done our review and the invoice post. They're also doing their review, looking at, the invoice to ensure that it's a legit invoice and that it got posted right and everything. So it's a whole collaboration with all the departments.
All right, Jill, I don't want you to get into specifics for obvious reasons, but
That's a good lead in.
Can you give me an example of where these controls and these processes that you've been describing today help prevent a potentially big issue?
So absolutely. And I think Carol and I are on the same wavelength. So the first step in our vendor info process is supply chain management or purchasing. So again, trying to not look at a control that is after the fact that we've either processed an invoice or am making or are attempting to make a payment. We want to get it at the front door. So that's a good key control for the vendor onboarding process. And we do many of the same items that Carolyn called out. So we look across the vendors to see who is sending the information into our paperless accounts payable system. We look at those email addresses, but even that can be scary because sometimes those email addresses are spoofed. So you have to constantly think outside the box. Well, if they spoof the email address, does this invoice number for this vendor, is it in the upper left corner or the upper right corner? You have to think like a crook, which is really, really sad. But the other thing I wanted to call out that Carolyn mentioned is banking. So just want to talk really briefly about positive pay. If anyone on the call today does not have positive pay set up for all their bank accounts, take care of that today and match on every available field that your bank gives you. So for many years, we matched on 3 of the fields that were available, just check number, check date, and check amount. We started matching on the actual payee name. And the sneaky little fraudsters, they will take like a period out of the name, but we've given the bank the information with the period. So now that flags. So I feel like I'm pretty well protected when issuing paper checks. But the same thing for ACHs. So Carolyn mentioned Comcast, and I don't know what it is about Comcast because we have the same thing. Comcast trying to take something out of the bank. So our treasury person contacts the AP team. Was the Comcast you? No, it wasn't. So we do have ACH block on all of our checking accounts. We also can deny if we want to incoming ACHs. So now the little trick they're doing, they'll send you a little bit of money. They'll send you 30 cents or $1.50. And then when they see that that deposit is not rejected, they'll try to suck it back out. Instead they're trying to take out $150,000 or $150,000. So again, fraud moves at the speed of light and we need to keep up.
Yeah, Carolyn, you mentioned the example with your IT director earlier. Any other cases where your controls and processes helped you mitigate a risk?
Oh, I'm sure there are. I know a fact for just yesterday, we had a vendor come through VendorInfo, and after we approve the vendor, we will email them back to let them know they've been approved. And we will also email the facility who sent the onboarding request so they know that they now can go ahead and do business with that vendor. We went into our onboarding, we could not find anywhere where anybody sent an onboarding link to this vendor. So we're like, how did they get the link to get in? Because you have to have the link to get in. It took a lot of investigation, but we found out the link that we sent to a particular vendor, they forwarded that link to someone else, which was a different company, to get set up. And it turned out it was legit. Our VP of finance knew about it, but it was a huge red flag because yeah, everything vetted, bank account, tax ID, everything looked great on paper, on screen, but we couldn't find who this guy was. So we definitely that taught us a lesson that okay, we're not just going to approve a vendor because everything looked good. Because if they were in our vendor info, they saw all the information on how to submit an invoice and what to do from there. So we know going forward, we have to make sure we are vetting, who sent that link before we ever approve anybody.
Jill, you and Carolyn have obviously done a lot to strengthen your controls and your defenses. But I got to ask, what's left? What are your priorities for making things even more Loctite at Asbury?
Well, I'd like to give a quick example of how an additional control prevented some fraud.
Sure.
So in vendor info, as I mentioned before, depending on the annual dollar spend, we'll do some extra steps, some extra tasks. And one of those is checking the Secretary of State's website as well as the vendor website. So a request came through for a new vendor, and the request was initiated by someone in our IT department. So think in the IT department. When I'm looking at the Secretary of State's website and what this business classification was registered for, they were a jewelry merchant. So I'm thinking, why in the heck would my IT group want to go purchase manufactured jewelry? So I get on the phone with the head of IT. And I'm like, did you request this vendor? It says it's 150,000 potential dollar spend. No, I didn't. And that's how these additional controls save the day. And thank you, vendor info.
There you go. Yeah.
I'm gonna
What,
I'm gonna
what,
make you repeat the question because I went off on a tangent there.
I know, but that was a great example. It was well worth it, Jill.
Okay.
What's left to do? What are your priorities for strengthening your defenses, Jill?
My priorities are to keep learning. So I think I know a lot about how fraudsters can get into our systems, make us do things we want to do, but the use and the quicker use of AI technology is terrifying to me. It's absolutely terrifying because I feel like as a human, again, I work in accounts payable. I want to be a people pleaser, so I have to take a step back and say, let the hairs on the back of your neck sing to you. Does something look odd? How can I understand where the technology is going and put controls in place ahead of the what's coming? And that's a unhappy place to be, but that's where we are today. So again, working hand in hand collaboratively with your cybersecurity and IT departments is absolutely essential. So don't put anything off to tomorrow that you can do today because tomorrow might be too late.
Yeah, that's great advice. Carolyn, what's the top of your priorities for strengthening your defenses even further?
I completely agree with Jill. It's just always continue to learn, try to stay on top of what the fraudsters are doing, the latest in the AI, attending webinars like this to learn from other people and what they're seeing and what they're doing. Just continuing to communicate with your staff. They sit right outside my door, so if something happens, I can usually hear them out there going, well, I don't know what this is, or can somebody come look at this? So it's just making sure that you just always vet everything as much as you can, and just watch out for those bad guys.
All right, let's dive into some questions from our attendees. We already have a few in the queue. If you haven't already submitted a question for Jill or Carolyn, or if you've thought of another question, go ahead and use the Q&A tool on your screen to submit them to me now. I'm going to answer as many questions as time allows. Our first question up, Jill, is for you. It's from Alexander. He writes, Jill, it sounds like you have a very strict verification process. How many levels of approval does a verification need to go through before paying a vendor? For example, in our company, our master data team performs the verification and we currently have one approval before paying a vendor. Would you recommend increasing that? Great question,
So great
Alexander.
question. So now we're talking about approving the AP invoice versus being in vendor info and approving the vendor itself. So we have a tiered approval process based on dollar amount. So and it's the dollar amount that you're assigned is based on your role in the organization. So those levels start at 15,000 and they go up to 100,000. So if we have an invoice that's $5,000, it requires one approval, and the person is going to have at least $15,000 worth of approval authority. So if we have an invoice that is, say, excuse me, 50,000 or more, you might need 2 levels of approval authority. Same thing with something that's over 100,000. You might need 2 to 3 levels of approval authority. That's a tongue twister. It depends on who the 2 approvals are. If it's 2 $100,000 people, that's fine if it's a $150,000 invoice. But if it's a different combination, we could have different approvals. We also have the option in our AP system, if I'm approving something and I just think to myself, I want so-and-so to take a look at it, it's very easy for me to select them in the AP workflow and shoot the invoice over to them as well. But yes, I would recommend having role-based or dollar-based approval authorities.
How do you do things at American Senior Communities, Carolyn?
Exact same way. We have multi-tiered. So when the invoice comes in, it comes to my team first. We are the ones reviewing it, vetting it, and coding it. And then it gets routed to an executive director who has a threshold of 7,500. So anything over
7,500.
that,
Okay.
yes. So anything over that then goes to a VP who has a limit of 25,000. And then it goes, there's another 3 tiers after that. So up to 100,000. So there are multi-levels.
We have a question from Win. Win is wondering whether either of you are using any tools for automated document validation to be able to detect whether a document has been manipulated, such as an invoice, which is difficult for a human to detect. Either of you using any tools like that in your AP process?
No.
So yes, I'm going to say yes and no. So we do have in our paperless system OCR recognition and some form of validation. It is not an AI agent. But we are actually looking at AP software and we're looking at changing because we feel like the technology has advanced significantly in the past 2 years. And again, we want to make sure that we are availing ourselves of the latest and greatest in the technology. And if I can have an AI agent sitting out there saying, this spend looks unusual for this particular invoice, or this vendor just submitted an invoice a week ago. Why isn't the next invoice coming a month from now? So again, always looking to improve what we can do from our end to protect ourselves.
All right, Sonia wants to know how you two are handling one-time vendors and what's your process for vendor deactivation. See, there's another tongue twister. Carolyn, I'll start with you. How do you handle one-time vendors and how do you deactivate vendors?
So one-time vendors, doesn't matter if we're paying them once or we're going to pay them daily. They go through the same vetting process. They have to go through VendorInfo and have all of their information vetted. So that doesn't matter to us. And, as far as deactivating vendors, the process we use is if a vendor hasn't been used in 24 months, we make them inactive. And my IT guru, as I call him, he can go in and he does that automatically. Every January, he goes in and he runs a list and he can automatically deactivate everybody all at once in our ERP. So it's great.
Yep.
Very similar process. So we do have a couple exceptions where you do not have to go through VendorInfo, and that is for our residents. So if we're doing an overpayment refund to one of our residents, we do not make them go through VendorInfo because we already have vetted them. They live at one of our facilities and that can be skipped. Same thing for employees. So when we reimburse employees, we don't make them go through VendorInfo. With that being said, again, very similar processes.
Yeah. A question for both of you. Win is wondering, you mentioned dollar tier approval levels. However, does your process allow approvers to also be initiators or requesters of the
Sure.
purchase?
Yeah.
A question from Audrey for you, Jill. She wants to know, what accounting system are you using that has that dynamic approval process?
So we're currently using a product by Pearsoft. We implemented their software called PaperSave in 18. And then when we moved to our NetSuite as our accounting software, PaperSave was not compatible with NetSuite at that time. So we moved to Parasoft's DocuPeek product. So we currently use DocuPeek.
Yeah.
And to be candid, we're looking at Ramp because they seem to have the most advanced AI agent, AP AI agent out there. So we're trying to compare and contrast the two systems right now.
Question for both of you from Lilia. She's wondering how you would describe the process of resolving any issues you've encountered with the vendor info system. Jill, I'll start
So
with you.
I've had really good experiences. We have made some pretty significant changes to our vendor information form. We also took our vendor change form and split it into a vendor change form and a remittance change form because we want to give so much additional scrutiny to anyone changing their bank account information. And that was very quick and painless. I have found vendor info to be very responsive when I email in with questions. And I honestly, I know this is a plug for vendor info. I don't know what we did before we implemented vendor info, to be honest with you.
Well, if you were
Paper
Carolyn, you
forms,
were shuffling
paper
a lot of
forms. Yes,
papers.
yes.
Exactly.
Carolyn, talk to me. How's the resolution process to any issues you've encountered with vendor info been?
Oh, vendor info is absolutely amazing. I mean, when we first implemented, I had a lot of customizations I wanted to my vendor information form. And we do our resident refunds and our employees through vendor info. We just don't vet them per se because they are just a refund or a reimbursement. But I have multiple forms for that people can fill out, a lot of customizations, and vendor info just made it happen. It was fantastic. I have never emailed them a question and not had a response and a resolution within the same day. They are by far one of the best companies that we work with as far as customer service.
That
I've
should make
never
Lilia
been
feel
happier.
pretty good. Um, we've covered a lot of ground here. Jill, what would be your single biggest piece of advice to the folks listening in today who are looking for ways to mitigate the risk of falling victim to fraud?
Make sure that your insurance policy includes cyber insurance. So if you have not already had a financial impact from a successful fraud attempt, you will. So that would be number one. Number two is educate, educate, educate. Make sure that your teams are fully aware that you support them in taking a pause and stopping and saying, this doesn't look right. That is just fine. And give them every tool available that you can to educate them on the types of fraud that are coming. And YouTube is not just for watching fainting goat videos. There are some really good videos out there on fraud. So if you see one of your staff watching a YouTube video, give them the benefit of the doubt.
Great advice. Carolyn, what would be your single biggest piece of advice to our attendees today to mitigate the risk of falling victim to payment fraud?
Just make sure you are properly vetting your vendors. You want to make sure you're verifying that tax ID number. And like Jill gave me a great idea. I've never even thought about checking social media or looking up their website. It never even occurred to me to do that. So that's something, if they're submitting an invoice for plumbing, but they're a jewelry company, yeah, what's up with that? So definitely, do a complete vetting of all your vendors and make sure they have all their ducks in a row. So you've got complete information.
Well, Carolyn and Jill, this has been an extraordinarily helpful conversation. We really appreciate your insights today, and congratulations on all your progress you've made in keeping those fraudsters at bay. We do thank you for your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
Yeah. And so to bring us home, we've covered a lot of ground today, but we thought we'd close with giving you an action plan for moving forward. And Phil, we've heard that the stakes are higher than ever, the schemes are more sophisticated than ever, And the role of AP is changing to become, well, a front line of defense here. And I know you wanted to talk a little bit about that.
I did. Thank you, Mark. And Jill and Carolyn, thank you all so much for participating today and for offering everybody your insights. Really, really appreciate it. And thank you guys. As usual, you have carte blanche. Uh, Mark, the situation has changed. I mean, today, what we're finding is, back in the day, which was only maybe 4 or 5 years ago, supplier onboarding might have been considered an admin task. Today it's really a very critical risk and compliance function. Uh, folks are folks are just really, really hammered with all of these attacks, and companies are so at risk that there's so many growing threats out there. Uh, Vendor impersonation, our compliance, our compliance and regulatory rules are only increasing. Uh, much higher, much higher accountability requirements, and as our supply chains become a little discombobulated, that changes things too, and changes who we buy from, and those changes open the door for unsavory characters to get in as well. Uh, the whole situation just becomes more complex. Uh, if we could go to the next slide, the hidden problem is manual processes really uh, can't keep up anymore. And people put together training programs that are good training programs, but they're ad hoc and they're manual, and it just keeps growing, growing like topsy, and it becomes really, really hard to manage. Particularly when they weren't really designed for the type of compliance verification and real-time fraud detection and continuous monitoring that's required these days. Uh, the bad guys have an asynchronous advantage over manual processes, and because their processes are not manual. They're highly sophisticated, they're really refined, they're very adaptive. They use the laws of large numbers to send out all kinds of hits, uh, because only a small number of those have to pay off for them to be successful. So they're like they're it's like pollen. It comes in the spring and it's all over the place, and only a few pieces of that have to get through in order to ruin make their day and ruin somebody else's day as well. Uh, the bottom line, and hopefully we'll have a minute or two to show everybody, is that manual vendor onboarding and validation and verification really uh, keep us exposed, and they don't totally fill the gaps. In fact, sometimes they create some gaps of their own and some additional seams that can be penetrated, which increases our risk of fraud and our risk of compliance violations, and a number of other management issues that all go with manual processes. So the purpose is to really reduce everybody's vulnerability on the paying side, and help them uh, feel confident and assured that the fraudsters aren't going to come back to bite them. And let me ask you, Mark, would this be a good time maybe to show folks what this looks like and how they might could do it?
Absolutely.
Good. Let me share my screen. Is that visible now?
Mm-hmm.
So there are really a number of different ways that you can attack the problem, and one way is to have a vendor-facing portal that your vendor sees. The portal is uh, looks like you. It has your graphics. It has your all of your logos on it, and you're looking at that now. I'll show you how this works and the forms the kinds of forms you can put up here, but you can put your own forms up here. In addition, you can also do one-offs where, let me just show you here. You can actually put in bank account or TIN or other data, and the system will automatically go out, do a check for you, and bring it back immediately. For those who have a vendor portal already and they're not using VendorInfo, you can connect with APIs to do the same type of validation as well. So if you have if you're using the vendor-facing piece, and all of this is modular, you can get certain components of it, but not have to get the others. What you would do is send your supplier an invitation, and the invitation would be set up in the system. They can be customized for different types of suppliers. They get the invitation. They come back to your instance of the site, and they start filling out their information. And all of this is security checked with multi-factor authentication. But they start filling out the forms, and these would be your forms. They fill out the bank information, which would be, they can put in US, they can put in non-US banks as well. Different information is required by non-US banks and also by country. Let me come back here. You're able to fill out tax registration forms. The vendors can fill out a W-9. They can fill out actually a real W-9, or you can embed a W-9 into your system that would look like this. And it's embedded. It's perfectly acceptable for the IRS to for your vendors to use this. All of these get updated as the IRS changes those forms. They get updated automatically for you. The system also accepts W-8s, but what's really cool about it is if you're ever dealing with W-8s, you know they're one of the worst forms ever. There's many of them. Suppliers don't always know which one to fill out. The instruction manual is 15, 16 pages of hard to understand language, particularly for maybe a non-native English speaking person. So all of that has been reduced to a wizard where the supplier just enters a few questions. Are you a citizen of the US? Are you an individual or a company? And then a few other questions that they would have to go through the whole instruction manual to find. And based on their answers, it's going to pull up the correct form and it's going to guide them through that form. So for those of you who are familiar with the W-8 Ben E, you know it's 30 parts, but not all 30 parts are required. Parts 1, Part 2, Part 3, Part 30 are all required, but the other parts that are required depend on the answers that are given in the form. So in this particular case, if the vendor is a sponsored foreign financial institution and it says complete part 4, when they click on that, part 4 will automatically show up, and then they sign this and they submit it, and away it goes. So you're collecting all the information that you need. In particular with W-8s, unlike W-9s, W-8s have to be resubmitted every 3 years. And you might have other forms that you collect, like certificates of insurance, that also have to be resubmitted, maybe annually. The system has a tickler file, and it automatically notifies you when a form has to be resubmitted or something, an upload has to be made in the future, and it'll automatically notify you, and then you can click a button and the system will automatically send an invitation to those folks. And you don't have to worry about keeping track of it separately. But what happens is once this information is entered, and once it's all there and submitted by the vendor, then it gets validated instantly. The bank account information that we were talking about today is validated. It's color coded, green, yellow, and red for U.S. domestic bank accounts. They are. There's a 9-point check that shows the routing number, the account number, and everything that matches that with the bank. So, and this is coming from bank databases. Everything is a valid match. This is one of our accounts. If it wasn't a valid match, I'll give you an example. Like Crazy Jim's Pizza shows up in yellow, it's suspect, and it tells you what's going on. It's a real account, it's open, but the name that was presented and the street address and the zip code and the TIN are all partial matches. They don't match perfectly, and the city and the state are warnings. They don't really match at all. And what this tells you is this is something that requires further investigation. And through our partnership with nsKnox, what you're able to do automatically, this is seamless to the vendor and it's seamless to you, is that can be validated with the type and the proprietaries they have using microtransactions and reverse traces. It works to really get those accounts that are not, those bank accounts that are not in a database, either a US database or a global database. It works to get those validated as well. In addition to bank account validation, there's also validation of taxpayer IDs. This is us once again. Everything is green. Matches address. It checks sanctions lists. It checks government watch lists like SAM, OIG, if you're in healthcare. It checks white collar crime, cyber crime, FACTA, things that you need to know about your supplier, and also gives you a way to really put some teeth into a know your vendor program as well. If there was a discrepancy, like there is here with this in red, what you'd see is in this particular case, the TIN didn't match. There's a problem with the address. It didn't really match exactly right. Everything else was okay. And then what you're able to do is from the system, you're actually able to click this little email icon and send the vendor this note, hey, something, there was a discrepancy, please verify your TIN. And they come back to the system and they also are able to go to the same form, make the corrections. And all the while, the system is keeping track of everything that everybody does, who does it, when they did it, what it was that they did, so that, essentially you have frontline risk prevention for your suppliers. And it also handles changes as well, changes to bank account information. If suppliers were going to change their address or their TIN, which they do occasionally, that is handled through the system as well. And you have a dashboard that allows your authorized folks to see what's going on with all of your vendors, no matter where they are in the world. And they can review this. They can click on approve if it's looking good. If you have a workflow that involves multiple people reviewing, which most folks do, it'll go through one stage and the next level and the next level until until all of the levels have been addressed. You can have multiple levels, multiple paths based on your own workflow rules and criteria. And then once everything has been finally approved, then it can be ready for export and to upload into your ERP system. It's a great, I'm obviously behind this, but it's just a great system. It works very well, and it brings in the tools and the functionality that we need today to have a pretty solid frontline risk prevention program. Mark, there may be some folks who have questions. I know we're reaching the top of the hour here, and happy to answer them about this or about anything else. And oh, thank you for showing that on the screen, by the way. Continual training. I know Carolyn and Jill had mentioned this earlier, but continual training is really, really important today. And we have Vendor Financial Operations Networks, the parent company from VendorInfo, has put together an entire training program on a website called disbursementcontrols.com. Disbursementcontrols.com, and we'll just go there real quick, has content and best practices to help everybody keep up with having the right controls in place at the right time. This is a subscription-based product. We're giving everybody who came to the webinar today the opportunity to go through it at no charge. You can look at this as your kind of beta view of the entire website. Feel free to you can click on, scan the QR code up there, or you can go to disbursementscontrols.com. Love to have you take a look at it. Mark's going to put up my contact information. Would love to have your comments and feedback on it. But it really is designed to help you stay ahead of what's needed today in order to be safe in your payments and have the right controls in place.
All right, with that, let's dive into the Q&A portion of this session. If you haven't already submitted a question for Phil, or if you've thought of another question for Phil, go ahead and use the Q&A tool on your screen to submit your question to me now. Lilia wants to know, are there cases where an account is not found in the database, but is still a legitimate account?
Yeah, Lilia, absolutely. There is the global banking system is fragmented. It's decentralized. Some countries, like the United States, have databases. Other countries don't. But there is no bank database that's complete, unfortunately. And in the United States, the databases are not 100%, and nor are they in any other country. So you could have an account that they're mostly complete, but not completely complete. And you could have an account that's a totally valid account, but it isn't in a database. It still needs to be validated. And we have tools that we've developed in conjunction with nsKnox, who you heard earlier, that can actually validate those accounts that are not in a database, and be happy to go into the details of how that works at any time with you.
Maureen wants to confirm that you have the ability to verify banking, not just internationally, but domestically as well.
Absolutely. Oh, yes, absolutely. Yeah, instant validation.
Amanda says her biggest challenge is getting the correct contact person for new vendors to confirm the ACH wire instructions. I don't want to rely on the invoice itself, as they can be duped. This is a common concern that you hear, isn't it?
Yeah. In a manual system, it's really hard to get that person. And then how do you know when you're really talking to the right person as well?
Yeah, that's actually what something Delina just wrote in about. Delina says it's a very manual process in confirming the new banking information with our legitimate contact across different departments that are not in our accounting system. That's what vendor info is for, correct?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Another question from an attendee. Tracy wants to know whether they can receive a copy of today's PowerPoint. Absolutely, Tracy. And to everyone else in the line, we will automatically send you an on-demand recording of today's event, as well as the PowerPoint associated with it. Question from Alexander. Alexander wants to know, so how fast does the database updates the new bank accounts for vendors?
So there may be two ways to interpret that question, Alexander. One is uh, how fast does the database get updated itself, and then how fast is the response time when an inquiry is made to the database? The databases are getting updated every day by the banks. Uh, the re, the response time for those accounts that are in databases is instantaneous. It's the speed of light. So when the vendor pushes submit or you do an inquiry, before you can get to the results page in your results dashboard, that answer is already there.
So, Phil, we've reached the end of our first ever Payments Fraud Virtual Summit. This has been just a treasure trove of insights and advice. Thanks so much for putting this together, Phil.
Well, thank you, Mark. Really, really appreciate everything that you and the team have done on this. Everybody's done a great job. I'd like to thank our audience for being an outstanding audience and answering some really, really great questions, uh, and really helping helping move this whole front line of defense narrative further. It's a big deal right now. Any questions that you all have about this or about anything on the topic, please feel free to reach out to us. Uh, Go to disbursementcontrols.com and let us know what you think. Let us know where you see some additional functionality could be in there for you. Very, very interested in it. You don't have to push the subscribe button and pay anything. It's not for you today. It's open for you. Uh, so thank you. Thank you all very much. Great audience. Mark, thank you for everything. I think, and thank all of our presenters, uh, everybody, Assaf, Carolyn, Jill, Bob, Shelly Ann. You guys have done a great job. And uh, we look forward to the next one.
That will be our final word. On behalf of Phil, the Vendor Info team, this is Mark Brousseau. Thank you, everyone. Hope to speak with you all again soon.